A young millionaire inherits a great fortune after the tragic loss of his parents. One day he finds a little beggar searching through the trash for food and lets her live in his garage. But one day, when he walked into the garage without knocking, he was shocked by what he saw. Alexander Foster stood at the floor-to-ceiling window of his penthouse, gazing out at the glittering cityscape below. The lights of New York City twinkled like stars, a stark contrast to the darkness he felt within. At 30 years old, he had everything money could buy, yet the vastness of his empty apartment seemed to mock him. Running a hand through his perfectly styled dark hair, Alexander let out a heavy sigh. 10 years had passed since the accident that took his parents, leaving him alone with an empire he never wanted and a void money couldn't fill. The weight of his family's legacy rested heavily on his shoulders, a constant reminder of what he'd lost and the expectations he could never seem to meet. "Mr. Foster," a gentle voice broke through his reverie. "Your dinner is ready." Alexander turned to face his personal assistant, Michael Chen. At 55, Michael had been with the Foster family for over 3 decades. He was more than just an employee. He was the closest thing to family Alexander had left. "Thank you, Michael," Alexander replied, his voice barely above a whisper. "I'll be there in a moment." As Michael nodded and retreated, Alexander caught a glimpse of his reflection in the window. Designer suit, expensive watch, not a hair out of place, the picture of success. Yet, his hazel eyes told a different story, one of loneliness and a deep-seated emptiness that all his wealth couldn't erase. With a final glance at the city below, Alexander made his way to the dining room. The table, large enough to seat 12, was set for one. A single place setting stood at the head of the table, a stark reminder of his solitary existence. As he sat down, the aroma of perfectly prepared steak filled the air. Michael appeared silently, pouring a glass of red wine before disappearing once again. Alexander stared at the meal before him, his appetite suddenly gone. "Is everything all right, sir?" Michael's concerned voice came from the doorway. Alexander forced a smile. "Yes, of course, just lost in thought, I suppose." Michael hesitated, then stepped forward. "If I may, Mr. Foster, perhaps it might do you good to get out more. Socialize, meet new people." A humorless chuckle escaped Alexander's lips. "And what would be the point of that, Michael? More people wanting a piece of the Foster fortune? More fake smiles and hidden agendas?" "Not everyone is like that, sir," Michael said gently. "There are good people out there, if you'd only give them a chance." Alexander's expression softened slightly. He knew Michael meant well, but the idea of opening up to others, of risking more pain and disappointment, was terrifying. "Maybe someday, Michael, but not now. Thank you for your concern, though." With a nod, Michael retreated, leaving Alexander alone once more. He picked at his food, forcing himself to eat, even though every bite tasted like ash in his mouth. As he ate, his mind wandered to his childhood, to happier times when this very table was filled with laughter and love. He remembered his father, Jonathan Foster, a business tycoon with a heart of gold. Despite his busy schedule, Jonathan always made time for his family. Alexander could still hear his booming laugh, feel the warmth of his hugs. And then there was his mother, Elizabeth, with her gentle smile and soothing voice. She had been the glue that held their family together, always there with a kind word or a comforting touch. But those memories were tainted now, overshadowed by the years leading up to the accident. As Alexander grew older, he began to see the cracks in their perfect family facade. The long hours his father worked, the forced smiles at charity galas, the whispered arguments behind closed doors. Money, it seemed, couldn't buy happiness after all. Pushing his plate away, Alexander stood abruptly. He couldn't bear to sit at this table any longer, surrounded by ghosts of the past. He made his way to his study, a room filled with leather-bound books and priceless art pieces. It was here, among the trappings of wealth and culture, that he felt most at home. Settling into his favorite armchair, Alexander picked up a book at random. It was a first edition of The Great Gatsby, a story that hit a little too close to home. He opened it, but the words blurred before his eyes. Instead, his gaze was drawn to a framed photograph on his desk. It was a picture from happier times, Alexander at 10 years old, flanked by his parents. They were at the beach, all three of them laughing as the wind tousled their hair. Alexander's chest tightened as he looked at their smiling faces. How had it all gone so wrong? The sound of rain pattering against the window drew his attention. Dark clouds had rolled in, mirroring his mood. Alexander watched as the rain grew heavier, sheets of water obscuring the city lights. There was something oddly comforting about the storm, as if nature itself was echoing his inner turmoil. A flash of lightning illuminated the room, followed closely by a rumble of thunder. For a moment, Alexander felt like a child again, wanting nothing more than to curl up in his mother's arms and listen to her soothing voice as the storm raged outside. But those days were long gone. Now he faced the storms of life alone, with only his wealth to keep him company. And what good was all that money when it couldn't buy what he truly needed? Love, connection, a sense of purpose. As the night wore on, Alexander remained in his study, lost in thought. The rain continued to fall, a steady rhythm that seemed to whisper of loneliness and regret. Little did he know that this stormy night would mark the beginning of a journey that would change his life forever. Outside, as the city slept and the rain poured down, a small figure huddled in the shadows near the gates of Alexander's mansion. Shivering and alone, a young girl searched desperately for shelter, unaware that her presence would soon shatter the carefully constructed walls around Alexander Foster's heart. The storm showed no signs of letting up as midnight approached. Alexander paced restlessly in his study, sleep eluding him as it often did. The patter of rain against the windows had become a constant backdrop to his troubled thoughts. Suddenly, a movement caught his eye. Through the rain-streaked glass, he spotted a small figure darting across his expansive front lawn. Frowning, Alexander moved closer to the window, squinting to get a better look. What he saw made his heart skip a beat. It was a child, a little girl by the looks of it, rummaging through the garbage bins near the gate. She was soaked to the bone, her small frame shivering in the cold night air. Without a second thought, Alexander rushed out of his study, calling for Michael as he went. "Sir?" Michael appeared, looking concerned. "Is everything all right?" "There's a child outside," Alexander explained hurriedly, grabbing a coat. "In this weather, we have to help her." Michael's eyes widened, but he quickly composed himself. "I'll get some blankets and hot cocoa ready, sir." Alexander nodded gratefully before heading out into the storm. The rain was even heavier than it had looked from inside, soaking through his expensive clothes in seconds. But he barely noticed, his focus entirely on the small figure by the gates. As he approached, the girl looked up, her eyes wide with fear. She couldn't have been more than 7 or 8 years old, her matted hair plastered to her face by the rain. When she saw Alexander coming towards her, she scrambled back, ready to bolt. "Wait!" Alexander called out, his voice barely audible over the storm. "It's okay, I'm not going to hurt you." The girl hesitated, her gaze darting between Alexander and the street beyond the gates. She was shivering violently, her thin clothes offering little protection against the elements. Alexander slowly crouched down, trying to appear less intimidating. "My name is Alexander," he said gently. "What's yours?" The girl remained silent, eyeing him warily. Alexander's heart ached. At the fear and distrust in her eyes, what had this child been through to make her so afraid? "Look," he continued, "it's pouring out here. Why don't you come inside? We can get you warm and dry, maybe something to eat. No strings attached, I promise. You can leave whenever you want." For a long moment the girl didn't move, then almost imperceptibly she nodded. Alexander let out a breath he hadn't realized he'd been holding. "Great," he said, offering a small smile. "Follow me." As they made their way back to the house, Alexander noticed how the girl kept her distance, always staying just out of arm's reach. Her eyes darted around constantly, as if searching for escape routes. It was behavior he recognized from wounded animals, and the thought that this child had been hurt badly, enough to act this way, made his blood boil. Michael was waiting for them at the door, a stack of fluffy towels in his arms. His eyes widened slightly at the sight of the bedraggled pair, but he quickly recovered his composure. "Welcome," he said warmly to the girl. "Let's get you dried off, shall we?" The girl shrank back, pressing herself against the wall. Alexander frowned, noticing how she flinched at Michael's outstretched hand. "It's okay," he said softly. "Michael's my friend, he's just trying to help." Still, the girl refused to move. Alexander exchanged a worried glance with Michael before an idea struck him. How about this? He suggested. We'll leave the towels here and you can dry off yourself. There's a bathroom just down the hall where you can change into some dry clothes. We'll wait out here, okay? Slowly, the girl nodded. Alexander and Michael stepped back, giving her space. She snatched a towel and the pile of clothes Michael had brought, then darted into the bathroom, the door closing firmly behind her. "Sir," Michael said in a low voice, "what are we going to do? We should call the authorities." "No," Alexander cut him off, surprising himself with the vehemence in his voice. "Not yet. Look how scared she is, Michael. If we call the police now, she'll run. And then what? Back out into the storm, to God knows what." Michael looked torn, but eventually nodded. "Very well, sir. But we can't keep her here indefinitely. She needs proper care, perhaps a family." "I know," Alexander sighed, running a hand through his wet hair. "Just give me some time, okay? Let's get her warm and fed first, then we can figure out what to do." As they waited, Alexander's mind raced. Who was this girl? Where had she come from? And why was she so afraid? He had always kept himself distant from others, but something about this child's plight had broken through his carefully constructed walls. Finally, the bathroom door creaked open. The girl emerged, swimming, in one of Alexander's old t-shirts and a pair of sweatpants that had been cinched as tight as possible at the waist. Her long, dark hair was still damp, but no longer dripping. In the light of the hallway, Alexander could see how thin she was, how her cheekbones stood out sharply in her pale face. "Feeling better?" he asked gently. The girl nodded, her eyes still wary but perhaps a little less frightened. "Great," Alexander smiled. "Are you hungry? We've got some hot cocoa and sandwiches if you'd like." At the mention of food, the girl's eyes lit up. She nodded eagerly, then seemed to catch herself, schooling her features back into a neutral expression. "This way," Alexander said, leading her to the kitchen. As they entered the spacious room, the girl's eyes widened. Alexander saw her gaze dart from the gleaming appliances to the well-stocked pantry, lingering on the fruit bowl on the counter. Michael had outdone himself, setting out a spread that would have fed 10 people, let alone one small girl. There were sandwiches of every variety, fresh fruit, cookies, and a steaming mug of hot cocoa topped with marshmallows. "Help yourself," Alexander encouraged, taking a seat at the counter. "Eat as much as you like." The girl hesitated for just a moment before hunger won out. She fell upon the food with a ferocity that made Alexander's heart ache. How long had it been since she'd had a proper meal? As she ate, Alexander and Michael exchanged worried glances. The girl's behavior, her fear, her obvious hunger, it all painted a disturbing picture. What had happened to bring her to this point? "Slow down a bit," Alexander said gently as the girl nearly choked on a sandwich. "There's plenty more where that came from. No one's going to take it away." The girl paused, looking at him with surprise. Then, slowly, she nodded and began to eat at a more measured pace. As the storm continued to rage outside, Alexander found himself at a loss. He had spent years isolating himself from others, building walls to protect himself from pain and disappointment. But now, faced with this vulnerable child, he felt those walls beginning to crumble. What was he supposed to do? He couldn't just send her back out into the world, not when she was so clearly in need of help. But he was hardly equipped to care for a child. He could barely take care of himself most days. Yet, as he watched the girl eat, something stirred within him. A long dormant protective instinct, perhaps, or simply basic human compassion. Whatever it was, Alexander knew he couldn't turn his back on her. "You can stay here tonight," he found himself saying. "We've got plenty of room. In the morning we'll figure something out." The girl looked up at him, her eyes searching his face. For what? Alexander wasn't sure. Deception? Ulterior motives? But whatever she saw seemed to satisfy her, because she gave a small nod. "Thank you," she whispered, her voice so soft Alexander almost missed it. It was the first time she had spoken, and the sound tugged at his heart. "You're welcome," he replied, offering a gentle smile. "Now how about we find you a room? You must be exhausted." As he led the girl up the grand staircase, Alexander felt a strange mix of emotions. Fear, certainly. Fear of the responsibility he was taking on, fear of failing this child who had already been failed by so many. But also, buried deep beneath the fear, was a tiny spark of something he hadn't felt in years. Hope, perhaps, he thought, as he showed the girl to a guest room larger than some apartments. This unexpected encounter was more than just a chance meeting. Perhaps it was an opportunity for both of them to heal, to grow, to find the connection they both so desperately needed. As he bid the girl good night and closed the door, Alexander knew that his life had irrevocably changed. What that change would bring, he couldn't say, but for the first time in years, he found himself looking forward to tomorrow. The first rays of sunlight crept through the curtains, gently rousing Alexander from a fitful sleep. For a moment he lay still, disoriented by the unfamiliar sensation of waking up in his study rather than his bedroom. Then the events of the previous night came rushing back and he sat up with a start. The girl. Was she still here, or had it all been a vivid dream? Alexander got to his feet, wincing at the stiffness in his muscles from a night spent on the leather couch. He made his way out of the study, his footsteps echoing in the quiet halls of the mansion. As he approached the guest room where he'd left the girl, a knot of anxiety formed in his stomach. What if she had run away during the night? He knocked softly on the door. No response. Taking a deep breath, Alexander turned the handle and peeked inside. The room was empty, the bed neatly made as if it hadn't been slept in at all. Alexander's heart sank. Had he imagined the whole thing? But no, there, draped over a chair, were the clothes Michael had given her last night. A noise from downstairs caught his attention. Alexander hurried towards it, his mind racing. As he neared the kitchen, he could hear Michael's voice speaking in low, soothing tones. "There you are, little one. I was wondering where you'd gone off to. Are you hungry? I can make you some breakfast if you'd like." Alexander rounded the corner to find a scene that stopped him in his tracks. The girl was there, curled up in a corner of the spacious kitchen, her knees drawn up to her chest. She was watching Michael warily as he moved about, preparing what looked like pancake batter. "Good morning," Alexander said softly, not wanting to startle her. The girl's head whipped around, her eyes wide with alarm. But when she saw it was Alexander, she seemed to relax slightly, though she remained tense and alert. "I see you've met our early riser," Michael said, offering Alexander a small smile. "I found her exploring the kitchen about an hour ago." Alexander nodded, then turned his attention back to the girl. "Did you sleep well?" he asked gently. The girl gave a small nod, her eyes never leaving Alexander's face. There was something in her gaze, a mix of wariness and hope, that tugged at his heart. "I'm glad," Alexander said, taking a seat at the kitchen island. He made sure to keep some distance between them, not wanting to crowd her. "Are you hungry? Michael makes the best pancakes in New York." At the mention of food, the girl's eyes lit up, just as they had the night before. She nodded eagerly, then seemed to catch herself, her expression becoming guarded once more. "Excellent," Michael said, pouring batter onto a sizzling griddle. "They'll be ready in just a few minutes. In the meantime, perhaps you'd like some orange juice." The girl hesitated, then nodded. Michael poured a glass and set it on the counter, sliding it towards her. She approached cautiously, snatched the glass, and retreated back to her corner, all without taking her eyes off the two men. As they waited for the pancakes to cook, an awkward silence fell over the kitchen. Alexander racked his brain for something to say, some way to put the girl at ease. But what do you say to a child who's clearly been through so much trauma? I like your hair," he said finally, gesturing to the girl's dark locks, which were sticking up in all directions after her night's sleep. "It's very stylish." The girl's hand flew to her head, patting down her unruly hair. For a moment, Alexander thought he saw the ghost of a smile flicker across her face, but it was gone so quickly he couldn't be sure. "You know," he continued, encouraged by her reaction, "when I was your age, I once tried to cut my own hair. It didn't go well. I ended up looking like a lopsided hedgehog for weeks." This time there was no mistaking it. The girl's lips twitched upward in a small but definite smile. Alexander felt a warm glow of triumph. "Pancakes are ready," Michael announced, setting a plate stacked high with golden, fluffy pancakes on the counter. "Help yourselves." The girl approached the counter slowly, her eyes darting between the pancakes, Alexander and Michael. Alexander made a show of serving himself first, then sliding the plate towards her. "Go ahead," he encouraged. There's plenty for everyone. After a moment's hesitation, the girl reached out and took a pancake, retreating back to her corner to eat it. Alexander watched as she took a small, cautious bite. Her eyes widened in surprise, and then she was devouring the pancake with gusto. As they ate, Alexander's mind raced. What was he going to do now? He couldn't keep the girl here indefinitely, could he? But the thought of turning her over to the authorities, of seeing her disappear into the system, made his chest tighten with an unfamiliar protective instinct. "So," he said, trying to keep his tone light, "I was thinking we could go shopping today. Get you some clothes that actually fit. Maybe some books or toys if you'd like. What do you think?" The girl looked up, surprise written across her face. She seemed to consider for a moment, then gave a small nod. "Excellent," Alexander smiled. "We'll go after breakfast. But first," he took a deep breath. This was the moment of truth. "I was hoping you might tell us your name, and maybe where you came from." The girl's expression immediately shuttered, her body tensing as if preparing to flee. Alexander held up his hands in a placating gesture. "It's okay," he said quickly. "You don't have to tell us if you don't want to. I want to help you. But I can't do that if I don't know anything about you." For a long moment the girl was silent, her gaze fixed on the floor. Just as Alexander was about to change the subject, she spoke, her voice barely above a whisper. "Lily," she said. "My name is Lily." Alexander felt a rush of emotion, relief, joy, and something else he couldn't quite name. "Lily," he repeated softly. "That's a beautiful name." Lily looked up, meeting his eyes. There was fear there, yes, but also a flicker of something else. Trust, perhaps, or at least the beginnings of it. "Thank you for helping me," she said, her voice a little stronger now. Alexander smiled, feeling a warmth in his chest that he hadn't experienced in years. "You're very welcome, Lily," he said, "and I promise you, as long as you're here, you're safe. Okay?" Lily nodded, a small smile tugging at the corners of her mouth. It wasn't much, but to Alexander, it felt like the dawn of a new day, for both of them. As they finished their breakfast, Alexander found himself filled with a strange mix of excitement and trepidation. He had no idea what the future held, or how he was going to navigate the complicated situation he now found himself in. But for the first time in a long time, he felt a sense of purpose. Whatever came next, he was determined to help Lily. And maybe, just maybe, in helping her, he might find a way to heal his own wounded heart. The shopping mall was a cacophony of sights, sounds, and smells that seemed to overwhelm Lily as soon as they stepped through the doors. Her small hand gripped Alexander's tightly, her eyes wide as she took in the bustling crowds and brightly lit storefronts. Alexander felt a pang of guilt. He should have realized that such a busy place might be too much for her. "We can go somewhere quieter if you'd prefer," he said gently, crouching down to her level. But Lily shook her head, a determined set to her jaw. "I'm okay," she said softly, though her grip on his hand didn't loosen. "All right," Alexander nodded, standing back up. "But if it gets too much, just let me know, okay?" They made their way through the mall, stopping first at a children's clothing store. Alexander had never felt more out of his depth. He was used to custom-tailored suits and designer labels, not picking out t-shirts and sneakers for a 7-year-old girl. Luckily, the store assistant was more than happy to help. She cooed over Lily, who shrank back at first, but slowly began to relax as the woman showed her different outfits. "What do you think of this one, sweetheart?" the assistant asked, holding up a bright yellow sundress. Lily's eyes lit up, her hand reaching out to touch the soft fabric. But then she hesitated, looking up at Alexander uncertainly. "It's okay," he encouraged. "If you like it, we can get it." Lily nodded shyly, and the assistant beamed. "Excellent choice. Now, let's find some shoes to match." As they moved through the store, Alexander noticed a change coming over Lily. She was still quiet, still wary, but there was a spark of interest in her eyes now. She ran her fingers over different textures, lingered over bright colors, and even offered a few soft-spoken opinions when asked. By the time they left the store, laden with bags, Lily was wearing a new outfit. Jeans, a purple t-shirt with a glittery unicorn on it, and light-up sneakers that made her eyes dance with delight every time she took a step. "Where to next?" Alexander asked as they exited the store. "We could get some lunch or maybe look for some toys or books." Lily thought for a moment, then pointed to a colorful storefront across the way. Alexander followed her gaze and saw it was an art supply store. "You like art?" he asked, surprised and pleased. Lily nodded eagerly. "Well then, let's check it out." The art store was a wonderland of colors and possibilities. Lily's eyes grew wide as she took in the rows upon rows of paints, pencils, and brushes. Alexander watched in fascination as she moved from shelf to shelf, her small hands ghosting over sketchbooks and canvases with a reverence he'd never seen before. "Do you draw, Lily?" he asked softly. She nodded, a small smile playing at the corners of her mouth. "I like to make pictures," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. Alexander felt a warmth bloom in his chest. It was the most he'd heard her say since she'd told him her name. "Well then," he said, "why don't we get you some supplies? You can pick out whatever you like." Lily looked up at him, her eyes wide with disbelief. "Really? Really?" Alexander nodded, smiling. "Go ahead." What followed was a whirlwind of activity. As Lily darted from shelf to shelf, carefully selecting items with a seriousness that both amused and touched Alexander. She chose a set of colored pencils, a sketchbook with thick, creamy paper, and, after some coaxing from Alexander, a set of watercolor paints. As they stood in line to pay, Lily clutching her treasures to her chest, Alexander found himself marveling at the change in her. The scared, silent girl from last night seemed miles away from this child who was practically vibrating with excitement over her new art supplies. After leaving the art store, they stopped for lunch at a small cafe. As they waited for their food, Lily immediately pulled out her new sketchbook and began to draw. Alexander watched, fascinated, as her small hand moved confidently across the paper. "May I see?" he asked when she finally set down her pencil. Lily hesitated for a moment, then nodded, sliding the sketchbook across the table. Alexander looked down and felt his breath catch in his throat. The drawing was simple but hauntingly beautiful. A small figure standing alone in a field of flowers, reaching up towards a bright sun. "Lily, this is amazing," he said softly. "You have a real talent." Lily ducked her head, but Alexander could see the pleased flush on her cheeks. "Thank you," she murmured. As they ate their lunch, grilled cheese for Lily, a salad for Alexander, he found himself wondering about her background. Where had she learned to draw like that? And more pressingly, what circumstances had led her to be alone on the streets? He wanted to ask, to try and understand, but he held back. Lily was just starting to open up, to trust him. He couldn't risk pushing too hard and scaring her away. Instead, he focused on lighter topics, asking her about her favorite colors, purple and green, and whether she preferred cats or dogs. Cats, definitely cats. To his delight, Lily began to respond more, her voice growing stronger with each answer. As they were finishing up their meal, Alexander's phone buzzed with a message from Michael. He frowned as he read it, a knot forming in his stomach. "Is everything okay?" Lily asked, noticing his expression. Alexander forced a smile. "Everything's fine," he assured her. "Michael just needs me to take care of something when we get back, nothing to worry about." But as they gathered their bags and headed for the exit, Alexander couldn't shake the uneasy feeling Michael's message had given him. The outside world, with all its complications and dangers, was starting to intrude on the bubble he and Lily had been in. He looked down at the little girl walking beside him, her new backpack filled with art supplies bouncing with each step, her face more relaxed than he'd seen it yet. He made a silent vow to himself. Whatever was coming, he would protect her. He didn't know how, didn't know if he was even capable of being what she needed, but he knew he had to try. As they stepped out into the sunlight, Lily squinting against the bright rays, Alexander felt a fierce protectiveness wash over him. This child who had come into his life so unexpectedly had already begun to work her way into his heart. And Alexander Foster, who had spent the last decade building walls around himself, found that he didn't mind one bit. "Ready to go home?" he asked, offering his hand. Lily looked up at him, a small but genuine smile on her face. "Home," she repeated softly, taking his hand. "Yes, I'm ready." As they walked to the car, hand in hand, Alexander couldn't help but feel that something fundamental had shifted. The word home echoed in his mind, filling him with a warmth he hadn't felt in years. Whatever challenges lay ahead, he knew one thing for certain: his life would never be the same again. And as Lily climbed into the car, clutching her new sketchbook to her chest, Alexander realized that he was okay with that. More than okay, in fact. For the first time in a long time, he was looking forward to what the future might bring. The drive back to the mansion was quiet, with Lily gazing out the window, her new sketchbook clutched tightly to her chest. Alexander's mind, however, was far from peaceful. Michael's cryptic message weighed heavily on him. "We need to talk, it's about the girl." As they pulled up to the gates, Alexander noticed Lily tense up. "It's okay," he reassured her. "This is home now, remember?" Lily nodded, but her eyes darted nervously around the grounds as they drove up to the house. Alexander made a mental note to ask Michael about increasing security. The thought of anyone trying to harm Lily made his blood boil. Michael was waiting for them in the foyer, his usual composed demeanor slightly ruffled. "Welcome back," he said, forcing a smile. "Did you have a good time shopping?" Lily nodded shyly, holding up her new backpack. "That's wonderful," Michael said warmly. "Why don't you go up to your room and put your new things away? I need to speak with Mr. Foster for a moment." Lily looked uncertainly between Michael and Alexander. "It's okay," Alexander assured her. "I'll be up to see your new art supplies in a bit, all right?" After a moment's hesitation, Lily nodded and headed upstairs. Once she was out of earshot, Alexander turned to Michael. "What's going on?" Michael's expression turned grave. "Sir, I've been doing some research about the girl, about Lily." Alexander felt his heart rate quicken. "And it's complicated," Michael said, leading the way to Alexander's study. Once inside, he closed the door and turned to face his employer. There was a missing persons report filed for a girl matching Lily's description about 6 months ago, but it was abruptly withdrawn a week later. Alexander frowned. "Withdrawn? By whom?" "That's where it gets strange," Michael said, pulling out a tablet and bringing up a news article. The report was filed by a woman named Sarah Thompson. She claimed to be Lily's aunt and legal guardian. But the withdrawal, it came from a law firm representing Evergreen Industries. The name sent a chill down Alexander's spine. Evergreen Industries was a multinational corporation known for its ruthless business practices and rumored ties to less-than-legal activities. But what could they possibly want with a 7-year-old girl? "There's more," Michael continued. "I did some digging into Sarah Thompson. She was found dead in her apartment 3 days after the missing persons report was withdrawn. The official cause of death was listed as an accident, but you don't believe that," Alexander finished, his mind racing. Michael shook his head. "The timing is too convenient, and there are inconsistencies in the police report that don't add up." Alexander sank into his chair, feeling the weight of this new information pressing down on him. "What about Lily's parents? Where do they fit into all this?" Michael's expression turned somber. "I couldn't find much, but there was a small obituary from about a year ago. James and Elena Carter, killed in a house fire. They left behind a daughter, Lily Carter." Alexander closed his eyes, his heart aching for the little girl upstairs who had lost so much. "A fire," he murmured, remembering how Lily had flinched away from the stove when Michael was cooking. God, what she must have been through. "Sir," Michael said gently, "I know you've grown fond of Lily, but this situation is more complicated than we realized. Evergreen Industries is not a company to be trifled with. If they're involved in this somehow—" "I don't care," Alexander said, his voice hard. "I'm not letting them anywhere near her." Michael looked worried. "Mr. Foster, I understand how you feel, but we need to tread carefully here. Perhaps it would be best if we contacted the authorities." "No," Alexander cut him off. "You saw how terrified she was when we found her. If we turn her over to the police, she'll just run again. And next time, she might not be lucky enough to find someone who wants to help her. Then what do you suggest we do?" Michael asked. Alexander stood up, pacing the room as he thought. "We need more information. About Evergreen, about what really happened to Lily's parents and aunt. There has to be a connection here, something we're missing." "That kind of investigation could be dangerous," Michael warned. "Evergreen has a lot of power and influence." "So do I," Alexander said, a determined glint in his eye. It's time I started using the foster name and resources for something that matters." Just then, a soft knock at the door interrupted their conversation. Alexander opened it to find Lily standing there, her new sketchbook in hand. "Hey there," he said, forcing a smile. "Everything okay?" Lily nodded, then held out her sketchbook. I made something for you," she said softly. Touched, Alexander took the book and opened it. Inside was a drawing of two figures, a tall man and a small girl, standing hand in hand in front of what was clearly meant to be his mansion. Despite the simple style, the emotion in the picture was palpable. "Lily, this is beautiful," Alexander said, feeling a lump form in his throat. "Thank you." Lily smiled shyly, then surprised both Alexander and Michael by stepping forward and wrapping her arms around Alexander's waist in a quick hug. Before either man could react, she had darted back out of the room. Alexander stared after her, the warmth of her embrace lingering. He looked down at the drawing again, then back at Michael, his resolve strengthening. "Whatever's going on here, we're going to figure it out," he said firmly, "and we're going to keep her safe, no matter what." Michael nodded, recognizing the determination in his employer's eyes. "Where do we start?" Alexander thought for a moment. "We start by making this place a home for her, a real home, where she feels safe and loved. And then we start digging. I want to know everything there is to know about Evergreen Industries, about what happened to Lily's family, about all of it." As Michael left to begin their investigation, Alexander remained in his study, looking out the window. The sun was setting, casting long shadows across the grounds. He couldn't shake the feeling that those shadows were closing in, threatening the fragile peace he and Lily had found. But as he looked down at the drawing in his hands, Alexander felt a fierce protectiveness surge through him. Whatever darkness lay in Lily's past, whatever dangers might be coming for her, he would face them head-on. For the first time in years, Alexander Foster had someone worth fighting for, and he wasn't about to let anyone take that away from him. The days that followed were a delicate balance for Alexander. On one hand, he was determined to create a sense of normalcy and safety for Lily. On the other, he and Michael were working tirelessly behind the scenes to unravel the mystery surrounding her past. Lily, for her part, was slowly but surely coming out of her shell. Her nightmares, which had woken the household with her screams in the first few nights, were becoming less frequent. She was speaking more, though still in soft, hesitant tones, and her smile, when it appeared, could light up the entire room. One sunny afternoon, Alexander found Lily in the garden, her new art supplies spread out around her as she sketched. He paused for a moment, just watching her, the look of concentration on her face, the way her small hand moved confidently across the paper. It stirred something in his heart. "May I join you?" he asked softly, not wanting to startle her. Lily looked up, a small smile tugging at the corners of her mouth. She nodded, scooting over to make room for him on the blanket she'd spread out. Alexander sat down, careful not to disturb her supplies. "What are you drawing today?" Lily held up her sketchbook. On the page was a beautifully detailed drawing of the garden, complete with butterflies fluttering among the flowers. But what caught Alexander's eye was a shadowy figure lurking at the edge of the drawing, partially hidden behind a tree. "This is amazing, Lily," he said, trying to keep his voice light even as concern gnawed at him. "Who's that in the background?" Lily's smile faded. She shrugged, turning back to her drawing. "Just someone I remember," she mumbled. Alexander's heart clenched. He wanted to press further, to ask about the memories that clearly haunted her, but he held back. Lily was just starting to trust him. He couldn't risk pushing too hard and shutting her down. Instead, he reached for a blank piece of paper. "You know, I used to love drawing when I was your age," he said conversationally. "Though I was never as good as you. Want to see?" Lily nodded, curiosity sparking in her eyes. Alexander picked up a pencil and began to sketch. His strokes were clumsy and unsure compared to Lily's, but he persevered, occasionally glancing up to see Lily watching him intently. Finally, he held up his drawing, a rather lopsided attempt at a portrait of Lily. "What do you think?" he asked with a self-deprecating grin. Lily giggled, a sound Alexander realized he'd never heard before. It was like music, brightening the already sunny day. "It's interesting," she said diplomatically, which only made Alexander laugh. "I think you're being very kind," he chuckled. "Clearly I should leave the art to the expert in the family." The word family slipped out before he could stop it, and for a moment Alexander froze, worried he'd overstepped. But Lily just smiled, a warm, genuine smile that reached her eyes. "Maybe I could teach you," she offered shyly. Alexander felt a lump form in his throat. "I'd like that very much," he managed to say. They spent the rest of the afternoon drawing together, Lily patiently showing Alexander how to improve his technique. As the sun began to set, casting a golden glow over the garden, Alexander realized he couldn't remember the last time he'd felt so at peace. Later that evening, after Lily had gone to bed, Alexander found himself in his study, looking over the information Michael had gathered about Evergreen Industries. The more he read, the more uneasy he felt. Evergreen was involved in everything from pharmaceuticals to technology, with subsidiaries in dozens of countries. But there were whispers of darker dealings, corporate espionage, unethical experiments, even rumors of connections to organized crime. A knock at the door interrupted his thoughts. "Come in," he called. Michael entered, his face grave. "Sir, I've found something you need to see." He handed Alexander a file. Inside was a photograph that made his blood run cold. It showed a man in a suit shaking hands with the CEO of Evergreen Industries. The man was Alexander's father, Jonathan Foster. "This was taken about a month before your parents' accident," Michael said quietly. Alexander stared at the photo, his mind racing. He'd always believed his parents' death was just that, an accident, but now, with everything they were learning about Evergreen. "There's more," Michael continued. "I did some digging into the project your father was working on at the time. It was highly classified, but I managed to find a few references to something called Project Firefly." "Firefly?" Alexander murmured, the name sending a chill down his spine. "Any idea what it was about?" Michael shook his head. "Not yet. But sir, the timing of your parents' accident and now Lily's parents, I don't think these are coincidences." Alexander leaned back in his chair, feeling the weight of this new information pressing down on him. "We need to know more," he said finally. "About Project Firefly, about my father's involvement with Evergreen, all of it. Whatever's going on here, Lily's caught in the middle of it. And I have a feeling my family might be more involved than I ever realized." As if summoned by their conversation, a small voice called out from the hallway. "Alexander?" Both men turned to see Lily standing in the doorway, clutching her stuffed rabbit tightly. Her eyes were wide and frightened. "Lily? What's wrong, sweetheart?" Alexander asked, quickly hiding the file. "I had a bad dream," she whispered, her voice trembling. Without hesitation, Alexander went to her, kneeling down to her level. "It's okay," he said softly. "You're safe here, remember? No one can hurt you." Lily nodded, but her lower lip quivered. Can I stay with you for a little while?" Alexander felt his heart melt. "Of course you can," he said, scooping her up into his arms. He looked at Michael over Lily's head, a silent communication passing between them. The investigation would have to wait. Right now, this little girl needed him. As he carried Lily back to her room, telling her silly stories to chase away the nightmares, Alexander felt a fierce determination settle over him. Whatever secrets lay in his family's past, whatever dangers Evergreen Industries posed, he would face them all. For Lily, he would move heaven and earth, and anyone who tried to harm her would learn just how formidable Alexander Foster could be when he had something worth fighting for. The morning sun streamed through the windows of Alexander's study, illuminating the mess of papers and files spread across his desk. He had spent most of the night poring over the information Michael had gathered, searching for any clue that might shed light on the mystery surrounding Lily and his own family's involvement. A soft knock at the door pulled him from his thoughts. "Come in," he called, quickly shuffling the papers into a semblance of order. Lily peeked around the door, her dark hair still mussed from sleep. "Good morning," she said softly, padding into the room in her unicorn pajamas. "Good morning, sweetheart." Alexander smiled, his fatigue momentarily forgotten. "Did you sleep better after our story time?" Lily nodded, climbing onto the chair across from him. Her eyes roamed over the cluttered desk, curiosity evident in her gaze. "What are you working on?" she asked. Alexander hesitated, unsure how much to reveal. "Just some old family business," he said finally. "Nothing very exciting, I'm afraid." Lily's gaze lingered on a photo, peeking out from beneath a stack of papers. Before Alexander could react, she had pulled it out. It was the picture of his father shaking hands with the CEO of Evergreen Industries. "Who's that?" Lily asked, pointing to Alexander's father. Alexander swallowed hard. That's my dad," he said softly. Lily's eyes widened. "You have a dad?" she asked, then immediately looked down, embarrassed. "I mean, it's okay," Alexander said gently. "Yes, I had a dad, and a mom too. But they're gone now, like your parents." Lily's lower lip trembled slightly. "Do you miss them?" Alexander felt a lump form in his throat. "Every day," he admitted. "But you know what? It gets easier, especially when you have people around who care about you." He reached across the desk, taking Lily's small hand in his. "Like I care about you, Lily, very much." Lily looked up at him, her eyes shining with unshed tears. For a moment, Alexander thought she might pull away, but then she squeezed his hand, offering a watery smile. "I care about you too," she whispered. The moment was interrupted by Michael's arrival. He paused in the doorway, taking in the scene before him. "I'm sorry to interrupt," he said, "but there's something you need to see, Mr. Foster." Alexander nodded, reluctantly letting go of Lily's hand. "Why don't you go get dressed, sweetheart?" he suggested. "We can have breakfast together in a little while." Once Lily had left the room, Michael closed the door and turned to Alexander, his expression grave. "I found something about Project Firefly," he said, without preamble. Alexander leaned forward, his fatigue forgotten. "What is it?" Michael handed him a file. It was buried deep in some old classified documents. Project Firefly wasn't just a corporate initiative. It was a joint venture between Evergreen Industries and a secret government agency. Alexander's eyes widened as he scanned the document. Genetic engineering? Neural implants? What on earth were they trying to do? "From what I can gather," Michael said, his voice low, "they were attempting to create some sort of enhanced human, faster, stronger, with increased cognitive abilities." Alexander felt sick. "And my father was involved in this?" Michael nodded grimly. "It seems he was one of the lead scientists on the project, but something went wrong. There was an accident. A fire in one of the labs." The word fire echoed in Alexander's mind, bringing with it the image of Lily's frightened face. "A fire," he repeated. "Like the one that killed Lily's parents?" "I'm not sure," Michael admitted. "But the timing, it's too much of a coincidence to ignore." Alexander leaned back in his chair, his mind reeling. "So what are you saying? That Lily might be connected to this Project Firefly somehow?" "It's possible," Michael said cautiously. "Her apparent fear of fire, her advanced artistic abilities, they could be indicators of something more." Alexander shook his head, anger rising in him. "She's a child, Michael, not some science experiment." "I know, sir," Michael said softly. "But if Evergreen is looking for her, if they believe she's somehow connected to Project Firefly, it could explain why they've gone to such lengths to find her." Alexander stood up, pacing the room as he tried to process this new information. "We need to know more," he said finally. "About the project, about what really happened to my parents and to Lily's family, and we need to find out what Evergreen knows." Michael nodded. "I'll keep digging. But sir, we need to be careful. If Evergreen realizes we're investigating them—" "I know," Alexander said, his voice hard. "But I'm not backing down. Whatever's going on here, Lily's caught in the middle of it, and I'm not going to let anyone hurt her." As if on cue, Lily's voice floated in from the hallway, calling Alexander's name. He took a deep breath, forcing a smile onto his face as he went to meet her. "Ready for breakfast?" he asked, taking her hand. As they walked to the kitchen together, Alexander couldn't shake the feeling that they were standing on the edge of something much bigger and more dangerous than he had ever imagined. But looking down at Lily, seeing the trust in her eyes as she smiled up at him, he knew one thing for certain: he would do whatever it took to protect her, no matter the cost. The secrets of the past might be looming over them, but Alexander was determined to face them head-on, for Lily's sake, and for the sake of the unexpected bond that had formed between them. He would unravel this mystery and ensure that the shadows of Project Firefly never darkened their lives again. The following days were a delicate balancing act for Alexander. By day, he focused on creating a sense of normalcy for Lily, filling their hours with art projects, walks in the garden, and quiet reading sessions. But by night, he and Michael delved deeper into the mysteries surrounding Project Firefly and Evergreen Industries. It was during one of their art sessions that Alexander noticed something peculiar. Lily was working on a new painting, her small fingers deftly mixing colors on the palette. As she worked, Alexander realized that the colors she was creating were unlike anything he'd ever seen before, vibrant hues that seemed to shimmer and shift in the light. "That's beautiful, Lily," he said, leaning in for a closer look. "How did you make those colors?" Lily shrugged, not looking up from her work. "I just see them," she said simply. "In my head." Alexander exchanged a glance with Michael, who was standing nearby. They had both noticed Lily's exceptional artistic talent, but this was something beyond mere skill. It was as if she could perceive colors that didn't exist in the natural world. Later that night, after Lily had gone to bed, Alexander and Michael discussed what they'd seen. "It could be a side effect," Michael said cautiously. "If she was." Indeed, part of Project Firefly, enhanced sensory perception might have been one of their goals. Alexander ran a hand through his hair, frustration evident in his voice. "But we don't know that for sure. And even if it is true, what does it mean for her? For her future?" Before Michael could respond, a scream pierced the night air. Alexander was on his feet in an instant, racing towards Lily's. A room with Michael close behind. They found Lily thrashing in her bed, caught in the throes of a nightmare. Alexander rushed to her side, gently shaking her awake. "Lily, sweetheart, it's okay. You're safe. It's just a dream." Lily's eyes flew open, wild with fear. For a moment, Alexander could have sworn they glowed with an unnatural light. But then she blinked, and it was gone. "The fire," she whimpered, clinging to Alexander. "They were in the fire." Alexander held her close, his heart breaking at the pain in her voice. "It's okay," he murmured. "The fire can't hurt you anymore. You're safe here." As Lily's sobs subsided, Alexander noticed something on her bedside table. It was a drawing, one he hadn't seen before. In stark, vivid colors, it depicted a laboratory engulfed in flames. In the foreground, two figures, a man and a woman, reached out towards a small child being carried away by shadowy figures. Alexander felt a chill run down his spine. The scene was too detailed, too specific to be a product of a child's imagination. It had to be a memory of the night Lily's parents died. Once Lily had calmed down and fallen back asleep, Alexander and Michael retreated to the study, the disturbing drawing in hand. "This changes everything," Alexander said, his voice low and intense. "This isn't just about corporate secrets or scientific experiments. Lily witnessed something that night, something Evergreen doesn't want anyone to know about." Michael nodded grimly. "It would explain why they've gone to such lengths to find her. If she remembers what really happened, then she's a liability," Alexander finished. "One they'll stop at nothing to eliminate." The gravity of the situation settled over them like a heavy blanket. Alexander stared at the drawing, his mind racing. The vibrant colors, the impossible details, it all pointed to abilities far beyond what any child should possess. "We need to know more," he said finally. "About Project Firefly, about what they did to her. And we need to find out who else was involved. There have to be other scientists, other families affected by this." Michael hesitated. "Sir, the more we dig, the more danger we put ourselves in, and Lily too. Perhaps it would be safer to..." "To what?" Alexander cut him off. "To turn her over to the authorities? To pretend we don't know what's going on?" "No, Michael. We're in this now, all the way." He stood up, pacing the room as he thought. "We need allies. People we can trust who have the resources to help us uncover the truth." "I might know someone," Michael said slowly. "An old friend from my days in the intelligence community. She's retired now, but she still has connections. If anyone can help us navigate this safely, it's her." Alexander nodded. "Reach out to her, but be careful, we can't risk tipping off Evergreen." As Michael left to make the call, Alexander found himself drawn back to Lily's room. He stood in the doorway, watching her sleep. In the soft glow of the nightlight, she looked so small, so vulnerable. It was hard to reconcile this innocent child with the mysteries and dangers swirling around her. Yet as he watched, he noticed something that made his breath catch, Lily's hand, resting on top of the covers, seemed to emit a faint, pulsing light. It was barely perceptible, but unmistakably there, a soft, bluish glow that ebbed and flowed with her breathing. Alexander's mind reeled. What had they done to her? What kind of life would she face with these strange, unexplainable abilities? And how could he, a man who had spent the last decade hiding from the world, possibly hope to protect her from the forces arrayed against them? But as Lily stirred in her sleep, mumbling something that sounded like his name, Alexander felt a fierce determination settle over him. Whatever challenges lay ahead, whatever secrets still lurked in the shadows, he would face them. For Lily, he would become the protector she needed, the family she deserved. As he quietly closed her door, Alexander made a silent vow. He would uncover the truth behind Project Firefly, expose Evergreen's misdeeds, and ensure that Lily could grow up safe and free from the shadows of her past. It wouldn't be easy, and the path ahead was fraught with danger. But for the first time in years, Alexander Foster had something to fight for. Something more precious than all the wealth and power his name could provide. With one last look at Lily's door, Alexander squared his shoulders and headed back to his study. The night was still young, and there was much work to be done. The game was afoot, and the stakes couldn't be higher. But with Lily's future hanging in the balance, failure was not an option. The truth would come to light, one brushstroke at a time, and when it did, Alexander would be ready to face whatever consequences it might bring. For Lily, for justice, and for the chance at the family he never thought he'd have, he would move heaven and earth. The real battle was just beginning. The soft glow of the computer screen illuminated Alexander's face as he pored over the latest information Michael had uncovered. It was well past midnight, but sleep eluded him. Every new piece of the puzzle seemed to raise more questions than answers. A gentle knock at the door broke his concentration. "Come in," he called, expecting to see Michael. To his surprise, it was Lily who entered, her stuffed rabbit clutched tightly to her chest. "I couldn't sleep," she said softly, her eyes wide and vulnerable in the dim light. Alexander's expression softened immediately. "Bad dreams again?" he asked gently. Lily nodded, padding across the room to stand beside him. Her gaze flickered to the computer screen, curiosity evident in her eyes. "What are you doing?" she asked. Alexander hesitated, unsure how much to reveal. "Just trying to understand some things," he said finally. "About my family and about yours." Lily tensed slightly at the mention of her family. Alexander watched her carefully, wondering if now might be the time to gently probe for more information. "Lily," he began cautiously, "do you remember much about your parents? About the night of the fire?" Lily's grip on her stuffed rabbit tightened, her knuckles turning white. For a moment, Alexander thought she might retreat into herself, as she often did when the subject of her past came up. But then, to his surprise, she spoke. "They were scared," she whispered. "Mommy and Daddy. They were always scared, always looking over their shoulders. And then, the men came." Alexander felt his heart racing. This was the most Lily had ever revealed about that fateful night. "What men, sweetheart?" he asked gently. Lily's eyes seemed to glaze over, as if she were seeing something far away. Men in dark suits. They wanted something. Something Daddy had made, but he wouldn't give it to them. A chill ran down Alexander's spine. "Do you know what they wanted?" Lily shook her head. "Daddy called it the key. He said it was too dangerous, that bad people would use it to hurt others. So he destroyed it." Alexander's mind was reeling. The key? Could it be related to Project Firefly? To Lily's mysterious abilities? Before he could ask more, Lily suddenly stiffened, her eyes going wide. "They're coming," she whispered, her voice filled with terror. "Who's coming, Lily?" Alexander asked, alarmed by the sudden change in her demeanor. But Lily didn't seem to hear him. Her eyes had taken on that strange, glowing quality Alexander had noticed before. She raised a trembling hand, pointing towards the window. "The shadows," she whimpered. "They've found us." Alexander rushed to the window, peering out into the darkness. At first he saw nothing but the moonlit grounds of the estate. Then a movement caught his eye. Dark figures were moving across the lawn, their movements precise and purposeful. His blood ran cold. Somehow Evergreen had found them. Acting on instinct, Alexander scooped Lily into his arms and hit the silent alarm Michael had installed. Within seconds, he heard the sound of security protocols engaging throughout the house. "It's okay, sweetheart," he murmured to Lily, who was trembling in his arms. "I won't let them hurt you. I promise." As if in response to his words, Lily's fear seemed to subside slightly. She looked up at him, her eyes still glowing with that otherworldly light. "I know," she said softly. "You're my protector now." The simple trust in her voice filled Alexander with a fierce determination. Whatever came through that door, whatever Evergreen threw at them, he would face it. For Lily, he would become the hero she needed. Michael burst into the room, his usually calm demeanor replaced by urgent efficiency. "Sir, we need to move. Now. The safe room." He was cut off by the sound of breaking glass from somewhere downstairs. The intruders were inside. Alexander nodded grimly. "Let's go." As they made their way through the darkened hallways of the mansion, Alexander's mind raced. How had Evergreen found them? What did they want? And most importantly, how were they going to get out of this? They were halfway to the safe room when a figure stepped out of the shadows ahead of them. Alexander's heart nearly stopped as he recognized the face. It was the CEO of Evergreen Industries, the same man he'd seen shaking hands with his father in that old photograph. "Mr. Foster," the man said, his voice smooth and cold, "I believe you have something that belongs to us." Alexander tightened his grip on Lily, who had gone very still in his arms. "She doesn't belong to anyone," he growled. The CEO's lips curved into a cruel smile. "Oh, but she does. Lily is the culmination of years of research, millions of dollars in investment. She is the key to unlocking human potential, and we will not let her go so easily." As he spoke, more figures emerged from the shadows surrounding them. Alexander felt a moment of despair. How could they possibly escape? But then, something extraordinary happened. Lily raised her hand, and suddenly the air around them seemed to shimmer and pulse with energy. The Evergreen agents stumbled back, their eyes wide with shock and fear. "Run!" Lily cried, her voice echoing with a power Alexander had never heard before. He didn't need to be told twice. Clutching Lily close, Alexander sprinted down the hallway, Michael close behind. Behind them, he could hear shouts of confusion and the sound of things breaking. They reached the safe room just as an explosion rocked the house. Alexander didn't know if it was Lily's doing or something Evergreen had planned, but he didn't stop to find out. As the heavy door sealed behind them, he finally allowed himself to breathe. What just happened?" he gasped, looking down at Lily in awe. Lily's eyes had returned to normal, but there was a new strength in her gaze. "I remembered," she said simply. "I remembered what I can do." As the gravity of their situation settled over them, Alexander realized that everything had changed. The secrets of Project Firefly, the true extent of Lily's abilities, the depths of Evergreen's depravity, it was all coming to light. And as he held Lily close, listening to the chaos unfolding outside their sanctuary, Alexander knew that their real journey was just beginning. The battle for Lily's future, and perhaps for the future of humanity itself, had only just begun. In the quiet of the safe room, with danger pressing in from all sides, a new chapter in their story was about to unfold, and Alexander was determined to see it through, no matter the cost. The safe room was eerily quiet, a stark contrast to the chaos that had erupted in the mansion. Alexander sat on the edge of a cot, Lily curled up against his side, her small body finally relaxed in sleep. Michael stood by the security monitors, his face grim as he watched the Evergreen agents searching the house. "They're everywhere, sir," Michael said quietly. "It's only a matter of time before they find a way in here." Alexander nodded, his mind racing. The events of the past hour played on repeat in his head. Lily's warning, the intruders, and most incredibly, the burst of power that had allowed them to escape. He looked down at the sleeping child, marveling at the strength hidden within her small frame. "We need a plan," he said, careful not to wake Lily. "We can't stay here forever." Michael turned from the monitors, his expression thoughtful. "I've activated the emergency protocols. My contact, the one I mentioned before, she should be on her way. If we can hold out until she arrives." Alexander's response was cut off by a soft whimper from Lily. She stirred in her sleep, her face contorting as if in pain. Suddenly her eyes flew open, glowing with that now familiar, ethereal light. "Lily," Alexander said gently, trying to keep the alarm from his voice. "Are you okay?" Lily sat up slowly, her gaze unfocused. When she spoke, her voice seemed to echo with a power far beyond her years. "They're coming," she said, but so are the others." "Others?" Alexander exchanged a confused glance with Michael. "What others, sweetheart?" Lily's eyes slowly returned to normal, and she looked up at Alexander with a mix of fear and determination. "The other children," she said. "The ones like me. I can feel them. They're coming to help." Alexander's mind reeled. Other children? Had Project Firefly created more than just Lily? The implications were staggering. Before he could process this new information, an alarm blared from the security console. Michael rushed to check it, his face paling. "They've breached the outer defenses of the safe room," he reported. "We have minutes at most." Alexander stood, positioning himself between Lily and the door. "Options?" he asked Michael. Tersely, Michael shook his head. "The emergency exit is our only chance, but it leads right into the woods. If we can make it to the rendezvous point, my contact can extract us. But with Evergreen's forces surrounding the house—" "We'll make it," Lily said suddenly, her voice filled with a confidence that belied her years. She stood up, reaching for Alexander's hand. "I can help. I remember what I can do." Alexander knelt down to her level, searching her eyes. "Lily, are you sure? You don't have to do this. We'll find another way." Lily smiled, a sad, wise smile that no 7-year-old should possess. "It's okay," she said softly. "This is what I was made for, to protect, to help, like you've been protecting me." A lump formed in Alexander's throat. In that moment, he saw not just the scared little girl he'd found in the rain, but a powerful being capable of extraordinary things. And yet she was still a child who needed him as much as he needed her. "Okay," he said finally, "but we do this together. I'm not leaving your side." Lily nodded, her small hand tightening around his. "Together," she agreed. As if on cue, the door to the safe room began to glow red, the metal warping under some intense heat from the other side. They were out of time. "Now or never," Michael said, his hand on the lever that would open the emergency exit. Alexander took a deep breath, looking from Michael to Lily. "Do it." The hidden door slid open, revealing a dark tunnel. At the same moment, the safe room door burst inward, filling the air with smoke and debris. Alexander caught a glimpse of armed figures rushing in before Lily raised her free hand. The air around them shimmered, like heat waves rising from hot asphalt. The Evergreen agents stumbled, their weapons clattering to the ground as if suddenly too heavy to hold. Lily's eyes glowed brightly, her face a mask of concentration. "Run!" she cried, her voice echoing with that otherworldly power. They didn't need to be told twice. Alexander scooped Lily into his arms, and together with Michael, they plunged into the darkness of the escape tunnel. Behind them, they could hear shouts of confusion and anger, but no footsteps following. The tunnel seemed to go on forever, twisting and turning beneath the estate grounds. Alexander's lungs burned, his arms aching from carrying Lily, but he pushed on. Finally, after what felt like hours but was probably only minutes, they emerged into the cool night air. The forest loomed before them, dark and foreboding, but they had no time to catch their breath. In the distance, they could hear the sound of vehicles approaching, Evergreen's reinforcements, no doubt. "This way," Michael said, leading them deeper into the woods. "The rendezvous point is about a mile north." As they ran, dodging trees and leaping over fallen logs, Alexander became aware of a strange sensation. It was as if the forest itself was coming alive around them. Branches seemed to move of their own accord, creating barriers behind them. Roots rose up, tripping their pursuers. He looked down at Lily, who was watching the forest with a mix of wonder and concentration. "Are you doing this?" he asked breathlessly. Lily shook her head. "Not me," she said. "The others. They're here." As if in response to her words, figures began to emerge from the shadows of the trees. Children, ranging in age from about 5 to early teens, their eyes glowing with the same ethereal light as Lily's. There were maybe a dozen of them, each radiating a power that made the air hum with energy. One of them, a boy who looked to be about 12, stepped forward. "We heard the call," he said, his voice carrying the same echo of power that Lily's did. "We're here to help." Alexander stared in amazement. These were the other subjects of Project Firefly, children imbued with extraordinary abilities just like Lily. But how had they found them? And where had they been all this time? Before he could voice any of these questions, the sound of approaching vehicles grew louder. The boy turned towards the noise, his expression hardening. "We'll hold them off," he said. "Get Lily to safety. She's the key to all of this." Alexander wanted to protest, to insist that they all escape together. But he knew there was no time, and somehow, looking at these children with their glowing eyes and determined faces, he knew they could handle themselves. "Thank you," he said, his voice thick with emotion. The boy nodded, then turned to join the others. As one, the children raised their hands, and the forest came alive with energy. Trees groaned and shifted, creating an impenetrable wall of vegetation. The very ground seemed to ripple, making it impossible for vehicles to pass. Taking advantage of the distraction, Alexander, Lily, and Michael pressed on. They could hear shouts of confusion and fear from the Evergreen forces, mixed with the awesome display of power from the Firefly children. As they ran, Lily suddenly stiffened in Alexander's arms. "Wait," she said urgently. "There's something I need to do." Before Alexander could respond, Lily closed her eyes, her face scrunching in concentration. For a moment, nothing happened. Then a pulse of energy radiated out from her, so powerful it made Alexander's teeth rattle. In the distance, they heard a massive explosion. Alexander turned to see a plume of fire rising from where his mansion stood. Lily opened her eyes, looking both satisfied and somewhat sad. "I'm sorry," she said softly, "but I couldn't let them have it. Any of it." Alexander understood immediately. Whatever secrets remained in the house, about Project Firefly, about his family's involvement, they were gone now, destroyed to keep them out of Evergreen's hands. "You did the right thing," he assured her, pressing a kiss to her forehead. As they finally reached the rendezvous point, a sleek black helicopter descended from the night sky. A woman with short grey hair and a no-nonsense expression leaned out, gesturing for them to hurry. "Took you long enough." "Michael!" she shouted over the roar of the rotors. As they clambered aboard, Alexander took one last look at the forest behind them. He could still see flashes of light and movement where the Firefly children were holding off Evergreen's forces. His heart ached for them, but he knew this was just the beginning. As the helicopter lifted off, carrying them to safety, Alexander held Lily close. She looked up at him, her eyes heavy with exhaustion but bright with trust. "What happens now?" she asked. Alexander smiled, feeling a mix of determination and hope. "Now," he said, "we fight back. We expose Evergreen, we find the other children, and we make sure nothing like Project Firefly ever happens again." Lily nodded, snuggling closer to him. As the first rays of dawn broke over the horizon, Alexander felt a sense of purpose he'd never known before. The road ahead would be dangerous, filled with challenges he could scarcely imagine. But with Lily by his side, and the knowledge that they weren't alone in this fight, he felt ready to face whatever came next. The helicopter sped on into the brightening sky, carrying with it the hopes of not just Lily and Alexander, but of all the children touched by Project Firefly. Their journey was far from over. In fact, it was only just beginning. The rhythmic thrum of the helicopter blades filled the air as Alexander gazed out the window, watching the landscape blur beneath them. Beside him, Lily had finally succumbed to exhaustion, her small body curled up against his side. He marveled at how peaceful she looked in sleep, a stark contrast to the extraordinary power she had displayed just hours before. "We'll be landing soon," the grey-haired woman, who had introduced herself as Diana, called from the cockpit. "I hope you're ready for a few surprises, Foster." Alexander exchanged a glance with Michael, who merely shrugged. It seemed that even his usually well-informed assistant was in the dark about their destination. As the helicopter began its descent, Alexander saw that they were approaching a large, secluded compound, nestled in a valley between snow-capped mountains. The facility looked like a cross between a high-tech research center and a fortified bunker. "Welcome to Haven," Diana said as they touched down on a helipad, one of the few places on Earth where Evergreen can't reach us, at least for now. Alexander gently roused Lily as they disembarked. Her eyes widened as she took in their surroundings, a mix of wonder and apprehension on her face. "It's okay," Alexander reassured her, taking her hand. "We're safe here." As they followed Diana into the compound, Alexander's mind raced with questions. Who was behind this place? How long had it existed? And most importantly, what did they know? About Project Firefly? His thoughts were interrupted as they entered a large open room that seemed to be a combination of a living area and a command center. Screens lined the walls, displaying data and surveillance footage from around the world. But what truly caught Alexander's attention were the people in the room. Children. At least a dozen of them, ranging in age from about 5 to their early teens. Each one turned to look at the newcomers, their eyes holding that same otherworldly glow that he had seen in Lily's. "More of us," Lily whispered, her grip on Alexander's hand tightening. One of the older children, a girl with striking blue hair, stepped forward. "Welcome to Haven," she said, her voice carrying that same resonant quality that Lily's did when she used her abilities. "We've been waiting for you." Before Alexander could respond, a familiar face emerged from a side room. His jaw dropped in shock. "Dad?" he gasped. Jonathan Foster, looking older and more careworn than Alexander remembered, but very much alive, stood before them. "Hello, son," he said softly. "We have a lot to talk about." The room fell silent as father and son stared at each other, years of absence and unanswered questions hanging between them. It was Lily who broke the tension, tugging on Alexander's hand. "Is that your daddy?" she asked, her voice filled with a mix of curiosity and concern. Alexander knelt down to her level, his mind reeling. "Yes, sweetheart, but I thought he was gone. Like your parents." Jonathan stepped closer, his eyes fixed on Lily. "So this is her," he said, his voice filled with wonder. The final piece of the puzzle. Alexander instinctively pulled Lily closer, a surge of protectiveness washing over him. "What's going on here, Dad? How are you alive? And what do you know about Lily?" Jonathan held up his hands in a placating gesture. "I know you have questions, Alexander, and I promise I'll answer them all. But first, we need to make sure. Lily is settled in. She's been through a lot, and her safety is our top priority." As if on cue, the blue-haired girl stepped forward again. "I can show her around if that's okay," she offered. "There are others here her age. It might help her feel more comfortable." Alexander looked down at Lily, silently asking for her opinion. To his surprise, she nodded, a small smile playing at her lips. "It's okay," she said softly. "I can feel that they're like me, they're family." With a mix of reluctance and pride, Alexander watched as Lily walked off with the other girl, soon surrounded by a group of curious children. Their chatter filled the air, a reminder that despite their extraordinary abilities, they were still just kids. Once Lily was out of earshot, Alexander turned back to his father, his expression hardening. "All right, Dad, start talking. What the hell is going on here?" Jonathan sighed, suddenly looking every bit his age. "It's a long story, son. One that started long before Lily was born, before Project Firefly was even conceived. But I suppose the beginning is as good a place as any to start." He gestured for Alexander to follow him into a private office off the main room. As they settled into chairs, Jonathan poured them each a glass of whiskey. Alexander accepted his with a nod, the familiar burn a welcome distraction from the whirlwind of emotions coursing through him. "Project Firefly," Jonathan began, his voice heavy with the weight of long-held secrets, "was never supposed to be what it became. It started as a dream, a way to unlock the full potential of the human mind. We thought we could create a better world, cure diseases, solve the great problems facing humanity." He took a long sip of his whiskey before continuing. "But somewhere along the way, things went wrong. Evergreen got involved, saw the potential for profit and power. They pushed us to go further, faster. Ethics be damned." Alexander listened intently, his mind piecing together the fragments of information he had gathered over the past weeks. "And Lily, the other children? They're the result of this project?" Jonathan nodded, his expression a mix of pride and regret. "They're so much more than we ever imagined possible. But they're also children, children who never asked for the burden we've placed on them." "So you faked your death," Alexander said, the Pieces finally falling into place. To protect them? To protect me? To protect everyone, Jonathan corrected. Evergreen. They're not just after profit anymore, Alexander. They want to reshape the world in their image, using the abilities we unlocked in these children. I couldn't let that happen. Alexander leaned back in his chair, his mind reeling from the implications of what his father was. Saying, "And now? What's the plan?" Jonathan's expression hardened, a fierce determination in his eyes. Now, we fight back. We expose Evergreen for what they truly are. And we give these children a chance at a normal life, or as normal as it can be, given their abilities. As father and son continued to talk, piecing together years of secrets and separation, neither noticed the small figure, listening outside the door. Lily, her eyes glowing faintly, absorbed every word, understanding far more than any child her age should. She turned away from the office, her young mind grappling with the weight of her role in this unfolding drama. As she rejoined the other children, Lily knew that her life and the lives of everyone in Haven would never be the same. The battle against Evergreen was just beginning, and Lily was determined to play her part. For Alexander, for her new family, and for the chance at the future she had always dreamed of but never thought possible. The days at Haven passed in a blur of activity and revelation. For Alexander, it was a time of reconnection with his father, with the truth about his family's legacy, and with a sense of purpose he had long thought lost. For Lily, it was a period of awakening as she began to explore the full extent of her abilities in the company of others like her. One morning, about a week after their arrival, Alexander found Lily in the compound's vast indoor garden. She sat cross-legged on the grass, surrounded by a group of children. Their eyes were closed, faces serene in concentration. As Alexander watched, a gentle breeze began to swirl around the group, despite the still air of the enclosed space. Flower petals danced in the air, and the very leaves on the trees seemed to shimmer with an inner light. "Impressive, isn't it?" Jonathan's voice came from behind him. Alexander nodded, unable to take his eyes off the scene. "What exactly are they doing?" "Connecting," Jonathan explained, "with each other, with the world around them. It's part of their training, learning to harness and control their abilities." As if on cue, Lily's eyes opened, finding Alexander immediately. A bright smile lit up her face as she waved him over. "Alexander, come see what we can do," she called excitedly. Unable to resist her enthusiasm, Alexander made his way over to the group. The other children watched him curiously, some with open friendliness, others with a hint of wariness. Lily took his hand, her small fingers intertwining with his. "Close your eyes," she instructed, "and just feel." Alexander did as she asked, feeling slightly foolish, but willing to humor her. For a moment, nothing happened. Then suddenly he felt it, a warmth spreading from Lily's hand, up his arm, and throughout his body. With it came a sense of connection, as if he could feel the life pulsing in every plant, every person around him. His eyes flew open in shock, meeting Lily's knowing gaze. "That's incredible," he breathed. Lily beamed, proud of her accomplishment. "We're learning to share," she explained, "to let others feel what we feel. Miss Diana says it's important for people to understand us, so they won't be afraid." Alexander's heart swelled with a mix of pride and concern. Lily had grown so much in such a short time, but he couldn't help worrying about the burden placed on her young shoulders. As the children dispersed, Lily tugged on Alexander's hand, leading him to a quiet corner of the garden. "Can we talk?" she asked, her expression suddenly serious. "Of course." "Sweetheart, what's on your mind?" Lily hesitated, fidgeting with the hem of her shirt. I heard you and your dad talking about Evergreen and the project and me." Alexander felt a pang of guilt. They had tried to shield the children from the harsher realities of their situation, but he should have known that Lily, perceptive as she was, would pick up on more than they realized. "I'm sorry, Lily. We didn't want to worry you." "It's okay," she interrupted. "I understand, but I want to help. I need to help." Alexander knelt down to her level, taking both her hands in his. "Lily, you don't have to do anything you're not comfortable with. Your safety, your happiness, that's what's most important." Lily shook her head, a determination beyond her years shining in her eyes. But it's not just about me, is it? It's about all of us. The other kids here, the ones still out there that Evergreen might hurt. I have these abilities for a reason. I want to use them to make things right. Alexander felt a lump form in his throat. In that moment, Lily seemed so much older than her 7 years, carrying a wisdom and resolve that both awed and saddened him. "Okay," he said, softly, "but we do this together. You're not alone in this fight, Lily. Never forget that." Lily nodded, a small smile playing at her lips. "I know. We're family now, right?" "Right," Alexander agreed, pulling her into a tight hug. "Family." As they embraced, neither noticed the figure watching them from the shadows. Diana, her expression a mix of concern and calculation. Later that evening, Alexander found himself in a heated discussion with his father and Diana in the command center. "We can't just sit here hiding forever," Alexander argued. "Evergreen is still out there, still hurting people. We need to take action." Jonathan sighed, running a hand through his graying hair. "It's not that simple, son. We're dealing with a multinational corporation with ties to governments around the world. One wrong move and we could lose everything. Not to mention putting the children at risk," Diana added. "They're not weapons, Alexander. They're kids who deserve a chance at a normal life." Alexander paced the room, frustration evident in every line of his body. "I know that, but what kind of life will they have if we don't stop Evergreen? Always looking over their shoulders, never able to truly be themselves?" The room fell silent, the weight of the decision hanging heavily in the air. It was Diana who finally broke the tension. "There might be a way," she said slowly. "A way to strike at Evergreen without directly endangering the children." Both foster men turned to her, interest piqued. "I've been working on something," Diana continued. "A way to expose Evergreen's misdeeds to the world, but it's risky and we'd need help from the outside." As Diana laid out her plan, Alexander felt a mix of hope and trepidation. It was dangerous, potentially deadly if things went wrong, but it was also their best chance at bringing Evergreen down and securing a future for Lily and the other children. "I'll do it," he said firmly. "Whatever it takes." Jonathan looked at his son, a complex mix of emotions playing across his face. "You understand what you're signing up for. This isn't just about money or power anymore, Alexander. This is a war." Alexander nodded, his resolve unwavering. "I know, but it's a war worth fighting." As the adults continued to discuss strategy, none of them noticed the small figure listening from the hallway. Lily absorbed every word, her young mind processing the gravity of the situation. She slipped away quietly, making her way back to the dormitory she shared with the other children. As she climbed into bed, Lily made a silent vow. Whatever came next, whatever challenges they faced, she would be ready. For Alexander, for her new family, and for all the children like her who deserved a chance at a real life. The battle against Evergreen was about to enter a new phase, and Lily was determined to play her part. As she drifted off to sleep, her dreams were filled with visions of the future, a future where she and the other Firefly children could live openly, using their gifts to make the world a better place. Little did she know that the greatest challenges and the most profound revelations were yet to come. The cool night air whispered through the trees surrounding Haven, carrying with it the promise of autumn. Alexander stood on the balcony overlooking the compound, his mind racing with the details of the plan they had spent weeks perfecting. Tomorrow they would make their first move against Evergreen Industries. A soft footfall behind him broke his reverie. He turned to see Lily, her small form silhouetted in the doorway. "Couldn't sleep?" he asked gently. Lily shook her head, padding over to join him at the railing. "I keep thinking about tomorrow," she admitted. "I'm scared, Alexander." Alexander knelt down, bringing himself to her eye level. "It's okay to be scared, Lily. I'm scared too, but remember, you're safe here. Nothing's going to happen to you." Lily's eyes, wise beyond her years, met his. "I'm not scared for me," she said softly. "I'm scared for you. What if something goes wrong? What if Evergreen catches you?" Alexander felt a lump form in his throat. The depth of Lily's concern for him never failed to touch his heart. "Hey," he said, gently squeezing her shoulders. "I've got the best team looking out for me. Your job is to stay here and keep practicing with your abilities. Can you do that for me?" Lily nodded, though her expression remained troubled. Suddenly, her eyes began to glow with that now familiar ethereal light. "I want to show you something," she said, her voice taking on that resonant quality it held when she used her powers. She held out her small hand, and Alexander took it without hesitation. Immediately, he felt a warmth spread through him, accompanied by a cascade of images and sensations. He saw himself through Lily's eyes, strong, brave, a protector. He felt her trust, her affection, and a fierce determination to keep him safe. But underlying it all was a deep-seated fear, not just for Alexander, but for all the children of Project Firefly. As the connection faded, Alexander found himself blinking back tears. "Lily," he breathed. "That was incredible." Lily smiled shyly. "Miss Diana's been teaching us how to share our feelings, our memories. She says it's important for people to understand us." Alexander nodded, still reeling from the intensity of the experience. "It certainly is. Thank you for sharing that with me, Lily." They stood in comfortable silence for a while, watching the stars twinkle above. Finally, Lily spoke again, her voice small but determined. "I want to help," she said, "with the mission. I know I'm just a kid, but I can do things. Important things." Alexander felt a mix of pride and concern wash over him. "I know you can, sweetheart. But this part of the planet, it's too dangerous. The best way you can help is by staying safe and continuing your training." Lily looked like she wanted to argue, but instead she simply nodded. "Okay, but promise me you'll be careful." "I promise," Alexander said, pulling her into a tight hug. "Now how about we get you back to bed? Big day tomorrow." As he tucked Lily in, surrounded by the soft breathing of the other children in the dormitory, Alexander couldn't shake the feeling that something monumental was on the horizon. For better or worse, their lives were about to change dramatically. The next morning dawned crisp and clear. The compound was a flurry of activity as final preparations were made. Alexander found himself in the command center, surrounded by screens displaying various data streams and surveillance feeds. His father, Jonathan, approached, clapping a hand on his shoulder. "Ready for this, son?" Alexander nodded, feeling a mix of nervous energy and determination. "As ready as I'll ever be. Let's bring these bastards down." As the team began to move out, Alexander felt a tug on his sleeve. He turned to find Lily standing there, her expression solemn. "I made this for you," she said, holding out a small, intricately woven bracelet. "For protection." Alexander's throat tightened with emotion as he slipped the bracelet on. "Thank you, Lily. I'll wear it always." With one last hug, he joined the rest of the team. As they boarded the helicopter that would take them to their destination, Alexander caught sight of Lily watching from a window, her small hand pressed against the glass. The mission was complex, a coordinated strike against multiple evergreen facilities aimed at gathering crucial evidence of their illegal activities. Alexander's role was to infiltrate a high-security data center, using his family name and business connections as cover. As they approached the evergreen compound, Alexander felt his heart rate quicken. This was it, the moment they had been preparing for. He took a deep breath, feeling the reassuring weight of Lily's bracelet on his wrist. "Remember," Diana's voice crackled over the comms, "we're here for information only, no unnecessary risks. If things go south, abort immediately." Alexander nodded, even though she couldn't see him. "Understood. Let's do this." The next few hours were a blur of tension and carefully orchestrated moves. Alexander found himself falling back on years of business negotiations as he smoothly talked his way through security checkpoints and executive offices. Finally, he reached his target, a secure server room that supposedly held the key to unraveling Evergreen's web of deceit. As he inserted the specialized drive that would copy the data, Alexander allowed himself a moment of hope. Maybe, just maybe, this would be enough to bring Evergreen down and secure a safe future for Lily and the others. But as the loading bar on the drive neared completion, alarms suddenly blared throughout the facility. Alexander's blood ran cold as he heard shouts and running footsteps approaching. "Foster!" Diana's urgent voice came through his earpiece. "We've been compromised. Get out of there now." Alexander grabbed the drive and ran, his mind racing. How had they been discovered? Had someone betrayed them? As he rounded a corner, he found his path blocked by a squad of armed security guards. Behind them stood a familiar face, the CEO of Evergreen Industries, his expression a mix of triumph and disdain. "Mr. Foster," the CEO said smoothly, "how kind of you to deliver yourself right into our hands. I do believe we have much to discuss." Alexander felt a moment of pure panic. Then, inexplicably, he felt a warmth emanating from the bracelet on his wrist. In his mind, he heard Lily's voice clear as day. "Be brave, Alexander. We're coming." As the guards moved to apprehend him, Alexander steeled himself. Whatever happened next, he knew one thing for certain. This was far from over. The real battle was just beginning. The sterile white walls of the interrogation room seemed to close in on Alexander as he sat, hands cuffed to the table before him. Hours had passed since his capture, each minute stretching into an eternity of uncertainty and fear. The door opened, and the CEO of Evergreen Industries strode in, flanked by two stern-faced security guards. He took a seat across from Alexander, a predatory smile playing at his lips. "Mr. Foster," he began, his voice dripping with false cordiality. "I must say I'm impressed. You've led us on quite the chase, but I'm afraid the game ends here." Alexander remained silent, his mind racing. Where was the rest of the team? Had they managed to escape? And Lily? Was she safe? As if reading his thoughts, the CEO's smile widened. "Oh, don't worry about your little band of renegades. We'll round them up soon enough. And as for the children..." He leaned forward, his eyes glinting with a mixture of greed and fascination. "Well, let's just say they'll be returning to their rightful place in our care." Anger surged through Alexander, momentarily overriding his fear. "They're not your property," he spat. "They're children, for God's sake, human beings with rights and..." "Rights?" The CEO cut him off with a laugh. "My dear boy, those children are the future of humanity. The key to unlocking potential beyond your wildest dreams. Do you really think such trivial concerns as rights apply to them?" Before Alexander could respond, a commotion erupted outside the room. Shouts and the sound of running feet echoed down the hallway. The CEO frowned, rising to his feet. "See what that's about," he ordered one of the guards. But before the man could move, the door burst open. Alexander's jaw dropped as Lily strode in, her eyes blazing with that otherworldly light. Behind her, he could see other children from Haven, each radiating power. "Get away from him," Lily said, her voice resonating with authority far beyond her years. The CEO stumbled back, his composure cracking for the first time. How did... "You get in here, security!" But his cries went unanswered. Through the open door, Alexander could see Evergreen employees and security personnel frozen in place, their eyes wide with a mixture of awe and terror. Lily approached Alexander, the cuffs binding him falling away at a mere gesture from her hand. "Are you okay?" she asked, her voice softening as she helped him to his feet. Alexander nodded, still struggling to process what was happening. "Lily, why are you here? It's too dangerous." A small smile played at Lily's lips. "We couldn't let you have all the fun," she said. Then, her expression growing serious, she turned to face the CEO. "It's over. We're shutting Evergreen down." The CEO, having recovered some of his bravado, sneered at the child before him. "And how exactly do you plan to do that, little girl? You may have some parlor tricks, but we have armies, governments, the entire world order on our side." Lily's response was not in words. Instead, she closed her eyes, a look of intense concentration on her face. The air in the room seemed to vibrate with energy. Suddenly, every screen in the facility, computers, phones, even the digital watches on people's wrists, came to life. Images began to flash across the screens, documents detailing Evergreen's illegal experiments, surveillance footage of children being subjected to painful procedures, financial records showing massive bribes to government officials. It was a devastating deluge of evidence, broadcast not just within the facility, but to every corner of the globe. The CEO's face drained of color as he watched his empire crumble in real time. "No," he whispered. "No, this isn't possible." "Oh, but it is," came a new voice. Alexander turned to see his father, Jonathan, striding into the room, accompanied by Diana and a team of what looked like government agents. "It's over, Richard. Evergreen is finished." As the agents moved to apprehend the CEO and his stunned guards, Alexander knelt down beside Lily. "Are you okay?" he asked softly, noticing the fatigue in her eyes. Lily nodded, leaning against him. "I'm tired, but I'm okay. We all are. The other kids, they helped me connect to the network, to find all the hidden files." Alexander pulled her into a tight hug, marveling at her strength and courage. "You were incredible, Lily, but please don't ever scare me." "Like that again," Lily giggled softly. "No promises," she murmured. As the chaos of arrests and confiscations swirled around them, Alexander found himself in a quiet moment with his father. "I'm sorry," Jonathan said, his voice heavy with regret. "I never wanted you to be caught up in all this. I thought by disappearing I could protect you." Alexander shook his head. "I understand, Dad. I really do, but we're stronger together. All of us." He glanced at Lily, who was now chatting animatedly with the other children from Haven. "We're family." Jonathan nodded, a small smile playing at his lips. "Yes, we are. And speaking of family," he trailed off, his gaze fixed on something behind Alexander. Alexander turned to see a woman he didn't recognize standing in the doorway. She was staring at Lily, tears streaming down her face. "Sarah," Jonathan called softly. The woman, Sarah, startled, her eyes darting to Jonathan and then to Alexander. I came as soon as I got your message," she said, her voice trembling. "Is it really her? Is she really—" Understanding dawned on Alexander. "You're Lily's aunt," he breathed. "But we thought you were—" "Gone," Sarah finished. "Yes, I had to disappear, to protect Lily. But now—" At the sound of her name, Lily looked up. Her eyes widened as she saw Sarah, a flicker of recognition passing across her face. "Auntie Sarah," she whispered. What followed was a tearful reunion as Lily flew into her aunt's arms. Alexander watched, his heart swelling with a complex mix of emotions. Joy for Lily, a twinge of sadness at the thought of losing her, and an overwhelming sense of relief that this chapter of their lives was finally closing. As the facility was secured and plans were made to dismantle Evergreen's operations worldwide, Alexander found himself on the roof, gazing out at the setting sun. So much had changed in such a short time. The world would never be the same, and neither would he. He felt a small hand slip into his and looked down to see Lily standing beside him. "What happens now?" she asked, her voice small but curious. Alexander squeezed her hand gently. "Now," he said, "we build a better world. One where you and all the other children can grow up safe and free to be yourselves." Lily nodded, a determined glint in her eye. "Together?" she asked. Alexander smiled, feeling a warmth spread through his chest. "Together," he agreed. As they stood there watching the sun dip below the horizon, Alexander knew that whatever challenges lay ahead, they would face them as a family. The future was uncertain, but for the first time in years, it was also filled with hope. The story of Project Firefly was far from over. In many ways, it was just beginning, but with Lily by his side and a newfound purpose. In his heart, Alexander Foster was ready to embrace whatever came next. The weeks following the fall of Evergreen Industries were a whirlwind of activity. As the world grappled with the revelations about Project Firefly, Alexander found himself at the center of a storm of media attention, legal proceedings, and ethical debates. But through it all, his focus remained on one thing: ensuring a safe and nurturing future for Lily and the other children affected by Project Firefly. It was a crisp autumn morning when Alexander stood before a panel of government officials and international representatives, ready to present his proposal for the future of the Firefly children. "Ladies and gentlemen," he began, his voice steady despite the butterflies in his stomach, "we stand at a crossroads. The children of Project Firefly represent both our greatest achievement and our gravest mistake. We have imbued them with extraordinary abilities, but in doing so, we've robbed them of their childhood, their normalcy." He paused, letting his words sink in. "But we have an opportunity now to make things right, not just for these children, but for all of humanity." As Alexander outlined his plan, a specially designed school and community, where the Firefly children could learn to control their abilities while also receiving a normal education, He couldn't help but think of how far they'd come. His mind wandered to a conversation he'd had with Lily just days earlier. They had been sitting in the garden at Haven, watching as some of the younger children played a game that involved moving small objects with their minds. "Do you think we'll ever be normal?" Lily had asked, her voice small and uncertain. Alexander had pulled her close, planting a kiss on the top of her head. "Normal is overrated," he'd said. "You're extraordinary, Lily. All of you are, and that's something to be celebrated, not hidden away." Lily had looked up at him, her eyes shining. "But what if people are scared? Of us? What if they hate us?" "Then we'll show them there's nothing to be afraid of," Alexander had replied firmly. "We'll show them all the good you can do with your abilities." Now, as he concluded his presentation, Alexander saw that same mix of hope and uncertainty on the faces of the officials before him. "Mr. Foster," one of them spoke up, "your proposal is intriguing, but surely you understand the concerns. These children with their abilities, they could be seen as a threat." Alexander nodded, having anticipated this response. "I understand your concerns, but I ask you to consider this. Every major advancement in human history has been met with fear and resistance. These children are not a threat, they're our future, and with proper guidance and support, they can help. Thus build a better world for everyone." As the debate continued, Alexander felt a familiar warmth emanating from the bracelet on his wrist, the one Lily had given him for protection. He smiled, drawing strength from the connection it represented. Hours later, as Alexander left the government building, he found a small crowd waiting for him. Among them were familiar faces: Jonathan, Diana, Michael, and at the front, Lily and her Aunt Sarah. "Well?" Lily asked, practically bouncing with anticipation. "What did they say?" Alexander knelt down to her level, a broad smile spreading across his face. "They said, 'Yes, sweetheart. We're going to build your school.'" The cheer that went up from the group was deafening. Lily threw her arms around Alexander's neck, hugging him tightly. "Thank you," she whispered, "for everything." As the excitement died down, Sarah approached Alexander, her expression a mix of gratitude and hesitation. "Alexander, I can't thank you enough for all you've done for Lily," she said, "but I hope you understand. Now that it's safe, I want to take her home, to give her the family life she deserves." Alexander felt a pang in his heart, but he nodded. He had known this moment would come. "Of course," he said softly, "Lily deserves that more than anyone." But before he could say more, Lily spoke up, her voice firm. "I want to stay with Alexander," she declared. "He's my family too." Sarah looked surprised, but not upset. She knelt down beside Lily, taking her small hands in hers. "Are you sure, sweetheart? You don't have to decide right now." Lily nodded, her expression serious beyond her years. "I'm sure, but maybe you could stay too. There's plenty of room at the new school, right, Alexander?" Alexander felt a lump form in his throat. "Of course," he managed. "There's room for all of us." As they left the government building, plans already forming for the future ahead, Alexander couldn't help but marvel at how much his life had changed. From a lonely, isolated millionaire to the guardian and advocate for a group of extraordinary children, it was a transformation he never could have imagined. But looking at Lily, her hand firmly grasped in his, he knew he wouldn't have it any other way. Whatever challenges lay ahead, they would face them together, as a family. The sun was setting as they drove back to Haven, casting a golden glow over the landscape. As Lily dozed off in the back seat, her head resting on Sarah's shoulder, Alexander caught his father's eye in the rearview mirror. Jonathan smiled, a look of pride and contentment on his face. "You've done good, son," he said softly. "Your mother would be proud." Alexander felt a warmth spread through his chest. For the first time in years, the mention of his mother didn't bring pain, only a bittersweet fondness. "Thanks, Dad," he replied. I think she'd be proud of all of us." As they drove into the sunset, towards a future full of both promise and uncertainty, Alexander knew one thing for certain: the real adventure was just beginning. Spring had come to the Firefly Academy, bringing with it a riot of color and new life. The sprawling campus, nestled in a secluded valley, was a far cry from the sterile labs and high-security compounds that had once defined the lives of its students. Alexander stood on the balcony of his office, watching as children of various ages moved between classes. Some walked, while others preferred more unconventional methods, floating a few inches off the ground or, in one memorable case, transforming into a flock of butterflies. A soft knock at the door drew his attention. "Come in," he called, turning to see Lily enter, her arms full of colorful drawings. "Alexander," she exclaimed, her face lighting up. "Look what we made in art class today." As Lily spread the drawings across his desk, Alexander marveled at how much she had grown in the past year, no longer the scared, withdrawn child he had found in the rain. Lily had blossomed into a confident, vibrant young girl. "These are beautiful, Lily," he said, examining a particularly striking image of what appeared to be a futuristic cityscape. "Is this what you see when you dream?" Lily nodded enthusiastically. "Miss Chen says our dreams can be a window to possible futures, so we're learning to draw them, to help us understand and maybe even shape what's coming." Alexander felt a mix of pride and awe wash over him. The curriculum at Firefly Academy was unlike anything that had come before, a blend of traditional subjects and specialized training designed to help the children understand and control their unique abilities. "And how are your other classes going?" he asked, guiding Lily to a comfortable seating area by the window. Lily's face scrunched up in thought. "Math is still hard," she admitted, "but I'm getting better, and in science we're learning about genetics. Did you know that our DNA is like a blueprint for our whole bodies?" Alexander nodded, a small smile playing at his lips. It was moments like these, seeing Lily excited about learning, watching her grow and thrive, that made all the challenges worth it. Their conversation was interrupted by another knock at the door. This time it was Sarah who entered, a tablet in hand. "Sorry to interrupt," she said, "but we've just received word from the United Nations. They want to schedule another visit to observe our progress." Alexander sighed, running a hand through his hair. While the Firefly Academy had gained significant support over the past year, there were still those who viewed the children with fear and suspicion. "All right," he said, "set it up, but make sure they understand our conditions. The children's safety and privacy come first." Sarah nodded, making a note on her tablet. As she turned to leave, Lily called out to her, "Auntie Sarah, will you come to the Spring Festival next week? I'm going to be in the talent show." Sarah's face softened, a warm smile spreading across her features. "I wouldn't miss it for the world, sweetheart." As Sarah left, Alexander turned back to Lily. "A talent show, huh? What are you planning to do?" Lily's eyes sparkled with excitement. "It's a surprise, but I think you're really going to like it." The week flew by in a flurry of preparations. The entire academy was abuzz with excitement for the Spring Festival, a celebration not just of the season, but of how far they had all come. On the day of the festival, the grounds were transformed. Colorful banners fluttered in the breeze, and the air was filled with the sounds of laughter and music. Families of the students mingled with staff and a select group of supporters, all there to witness the extraordinary achievements of these remarkable children. As Alexander made his rounds, greeting guests and checking on last-minute preparations, he couldn't help but feel a sense of pride and accomplishment. This was what they had been working towards, a place where these children could be themselves, where their gifts were celebrated rather than feared. Finally, it was time for the talent show. Alexander took his seat in the front row, flanked by Sarah and his father. As the performances began, he was once again struck by the sheer diversity of abilities among the students. There were displays of telekinesis that would put stage magicians to shame, mind-bending illusions that blurred the line between reality and fantasy, and even a hauntingly beautiful song performed by a girl who could manipulate sound waves with her mind. But it was Lily's performance that truly took his breath away. As she stepped onto the stage, a hush fell over the audience. Lily closed her eyes, took a deep breath, and then she began to glow. Soft tendrils of light emanated from her body, coalescing into shapes and figures that danced around her. It was like watching a painting come to life. The light figures told a story. Their story. Alexander saw himself, rendered in glowing lines, discovering Lily in the rain. He saw their escape from Evergreen, the founding of the academy, and finally, a vision of the future, a world where humans with extraordinary abilities worked alongside those without, building a brighter tomorrow for all. As the performance ended, there wasn't a dry eye in the house. The applause was Thunderous, with many in the audience rising to their feet in a standing ovation, Lily ran off the stage and straight into Alexander's arms. "Did you like it?" she asked, her eyes shining with a mix of excitement and nervous energy. Alexander hugged her tightly, feeling a lump form in his throat. "It was perfect, Lily," he managed. "Absolutely perfect." As the festival continued around them, Alexander found a quiet moment to slip away. He made his way to a small hilltop overlooking the academy grounds. The sun was beginning to set, casting a warm glow over the scene below. He felt, rather than heard, someone approach. Turning, he saw his father join him on the hilltop. "Quite a view," Jonathan remarked, his eyes taking in the bustling festival below. Alexander nodded. "Did you ever imagine it would turn out like this?" he asked. "When you first started Project Firefly, I mean." Jonathan was quiet for a moment, his expression thoughtful. "No," he admitted finally. "I had hopes, dreams, but this is beyond anything I could have imagined." He turned to Alexander, placing a hand on his shoulder. "And it's all thanks to you, son." Alexander shook his head. "Not just me. All of us. The children, the staff, everyone who believed in what we're doing here." As they stood there watching the sun sink lower in the sky, Alexander felt a sense of peace wash over him. The road had been long and fraught with challenges, but standing here, seeing the fruits of their labor, he knew it had all been worth it. The future was still uncertain. There would be more challenges to face, more battles to fight. But looking down at the thriving community they had built, at the children laughing and playing, using their gifts freely and joyfully, Alexander knew they were ready for whatever came next. As the first stars began to twinkle in the darkening sky, Alexander made a silent vow. He would continue to protect these children, to nurture their gifts, and to fight for a world that accepted and celebrated them, not just for Lily or for the other Firefly children, but for all the extraordinary individuals yet to come. The legacy of Project Firefly was no longer one of secrecy and fear. Instead, it had become a beacon of hope, a promise of a brighter future for all of humanity. And Alexander Foster, once a lonely millionaire, now stood at the heart of it all. A guardian, a teacher, and above all a father to a very special little girl who had changed his life in ways he never could have imagined. As he turned to head back to the festival, Alexander felt a small hand slip into his. Lily smiled up at him, her eyes reflecting the starlight above. Together they walked back towards the lights and laughter, ready to embrace whatever the future might hold. 5 years had passed since the founding of Firefly Academy, and the world was a very different place. The existence of individuals with extraordinary abilities was no longer a secret, and society was still grappling with the implications. Alexander Foster stood before a packed auditorium at the United Nations headquarters in New York. The eyes of the world were upon him as he prepared to address the Global Summit on Enhanced Human Rights. "Distinguished delegates, honored guests," he began, his voice steady despite the gravity of the moment. "We stand at a crossroads in human history. The children of Project Firefly, and others like them who have since come forward, represent not just a scientific breakthrough, but a challenge to our very understanding of what it means to be human." As he spoke, Alexander's mind wandered to the journey that had brought him here. He thought of Lily, now a vibrant 12-year-old, who had become a symbol of hope and progress for many. He thought of the other Firefly children, each carving their own path in a world that was still learning to understand them. These individuals, he continued, possess abilities that many would consider miraculous. But they are not gods, nor are they weapons to be feared and controlled. They are human beings with the same rights, desires, and capacity for both good and ill as any of us. The chamber was silent, hanging on his every word. Alexander could see a mix of emotions on the faces before him: hope, fear, curiosity, and in some cases barely concealed hostility. What we decide here today will shape the future of our species. Will we embrace this new chapter in human evolution, working together to build a world where all abilities are celebrated and used for the greater good? Or will we allow fear and prejudice to drive us apart, potentially triggering a conflict that could devastate our planet? As Alexander concluded his speech, calling for comprehensive legislation to protect the rights of enhanced individuals while also establishing ethical guidelines for the use of their abilities, the chamber erupted in applause. But he knew that applause didn't necessarily mean agreement. The real work was just beginning. Hours later, as Alexander left the UN building, he found a familiar face waiting for him. Lily, accompanied by Sarah and Michael, was bouncing on her toes with excitement. "How did it go?" she asked eagerly. "Did they listen?" Alexander smiled, pulling her into a hug. "They listened, sweetheart, but there's still a long way to go." As they walked to the car, Alexander noticed Lily's furrowed brow. "What's on your mind?" he asked gently. Lily was quiet for a moment before responding. "I was just thinking about the future, about what's going to happen to all of us." Alexander felt a familiar pang in his heart. Despite all their efforts to give the Firefly children a normal life, they couldn't shield them from the weight of their unique position in the world. "The future's not set in stone, Lily," he said, squeezing her hand. "We're all working to make sure it's a good one. For you, for all the enhanced individuals out there, and for everyone else too." Lily nodded, but Alexander could see the worry lingering in her eyes. It was a stark reminder that for all her extraordinary abilities, she was still a child carrying a burden no child should have to bear. As they drove back to their hotel, Alexander's phone buzzed with a message from Jonathan. "Turn on the news," it read. Michael, who was driving, obliged, switching on the car's built-in screen. A breaking news alert filled the display. "We interrupt this program with breaking news," the anchor announced. "A group claiming to represent enhanced individuals has taken control of a major tech company's headquarters in Silicon Valley. They are demanding recognition and rights for all enhanced persons, threatening to use their abilities if their demands are not met." Alexander felt his blood run cold. This was exactly the kind of scenario they had been working to prevent, a confrontation that could spark widespread fear and backlash against enhanced individuals. "We need to do something," Lily said, her voice small but determined. Alexander nodded, his mind already racing with possibilities. "Yes, we do, but we need to be careful. One wrong move could make things much worse." As they sped towards the airport, where a private jet was waiting to take them to California, Alexander couldn't shake a feeling of déjà vu. Once again, he found himself racing towards danger, with Lily by his side. But this time, the stakes were even higher. The future they had worked so hard to build was hanging in the balance, and as the New York skyline faded behind them, Alexander knew that the real test of everything they had accomplished was just beginning. The winds of change were blowing, and the storm that had been brewing on the horizon was finally breaking. Whatever happened next would shape the course of human history. And once again, Alexander Foster and Lily found themselves at the heart of it all. The situation in Silicon Valley had escalated by the time Alexander, Lily, and their team arrived. Police had cordoned off a 10-block radius around the tech company's headquarters, and news helicopters circled overhead, broadcasting tense standoff to the world. As they approached the command center that had been set up nearby, Alexander felt Lily tense beside him. He looked down to see her eyes glowing faintly, a sign that she was using her abilities. "What do you sense?" he asked softly. Lily's brow furrowed in concentration. "Fear," she replied. "So much fear, from both sides, but also hope. They want to be heard, Alexander. They're scared and angry, but they don't really want to hurt anyone." Alexander nodded, feeling a mixture of pride and concern. Lily's empathic abilities had grown stronger over the years, allowing her to sense emotions and even glimpse surface thoughts, but he worried about the toll it took on her. "Remember what we practiced," he said gently. "Don't let their emotions overwhelm you. Stay centered." Lily nodded, taking a deep breath. As they entered the command center, all eyes turned to them. Alexander recognized the mix of hope and wariness in the faces of the officials present. Even after years of working with enhanced individuals, many still didn't know how to react to them. "Mr. Foster," the police chief greeted him, relief evident in his voice. "We're glad you're here. The situation is volatile. The enhanced individuals inside are demonstrating abilities we've never seen before. We're out of our depth." Alexander nodded grimly. "I understand. We're here to help de-escalate the situation, but I need you to understand. These people are scared. They're fighting for their rights, their future. We need to approach this with compassion, not force." As Alexander was briefed on the situation, Lily wandered to the edge of the command center, her eyes fixed on the building in the distance. Sarah followed her, concern etched on her face. "Lily, what is it?" she asked. "I know them," Lily said softly. "Or, I know of them, they're like us, products of experiments like Project Firefly, but they didn't have a place like the Academy. They've been alone, scared, hiding who they are." Sarah wrapped an arm around Lily's shoulders. "It's not your fault, sweetheart. We can't save everyone." Lily shook her head, determination blazing in her eyes. "But we can try." Before Sarah could respond, Lily had broken away, marching purposefully towards Alexander and the officials. "I want to go in," she announced, her voice ringing with authority that belied her young age. The room fell silent. Alexander knelt down to Lily's level, searching her face. "Lily, it's too dangerous. We don't know what kind of abilities these individuals have, or how unstable they might be." "But I do," Lily insisted. "I can sense them, Alexander. They're like us, they're family, and family helps family." Alexander felt a surge of pride mixed with fear. This was the Lily he had watched grow and bloom over the years, compassionate, brave, and fiercely protective of others like her. But the thought of her walking into such a dangerous situation made his heart clench. Before he could respond, another voice chimed in. "She's right." Alexander turned to see Jonathan entering the command center, accompanied by Diana and several of the older Firefly Academy students. "Dad? What are you doing here?" Jonathan smiled grimly. "Did you really think we'd let you face this alone?" "Lily's right. These people need to see that they're not alone, that there's a place for them in this world," as the officials sputtered. Protests. Alexander felt a sense of calm settle over him. He looked at the determined faces around him, Lily, Jonathan, the other Firefly children. This was what they had been preparing for all along. "All right," he said finally, "but we do this carefully. No one takes unnecessary risks." What followed was a tense but ultimately triumphant negotiation. Lily, along with some of the older Firefly students, acted as a bridge between the frightened, angry, enhanced individuals and the authorities. Their shared experiences, their understanding of the fear and isolation that came with being different, allowed them to connect in a way no one else could. Hours passed, but finally, a resolution was reached. The enhanced individuals agreed to come out peacefully in exchange for a guarantee of fair treatment and a chance to tell their stories to the world. As the sun began to set, Alexander watched as Lily emerged from the building, hand in hand with a young man who had been one of the leaders of the protest. The look of compassion and understanding on her face made his heart swell with pride. In the days that followed, the world watched in awe as the stories of these enhanced individuals unfolded. Tales of isolation, fear, and struggle, but also of hope and a desire to use their gifts for good. Public opinion began to shift, with more and more people calling for understanding and acceptance rather than fear and control. A month after the Silicon Valley incident, Alexander once again found himself addressing the United Nations. But this time, he wasn't alone. Lily stood beside him, along with representatives from various groups of enhanced individuals from around the world. "Ladies and gentlemen," Alexander began, "I stand before you not just as the founder of Firefly Academy, but as a witness to the incredible potential that lies within every human being, enhanced or not. The events of the past month have shown us that fear and isolation are the real enemies, not individuals with extraordinary abilities." He gestured to Lily and the others beside him. "These remarkable individuals represent the future of humanity, not as a separate species or a superior race, but as a reminder of the incredible diversity and potential that exists within all of us. By embracing this diversity, by working together, we can build a world that is truly extraordinary." As applause filled the chamber, Alexander felt Lily's hand slip into his. He looked down to see her smiling up at him, her eyes shining with pride and love. "We did it," she whispered. Alexander squeezed her hand, his heart full. "No, Lily," he replied softly. "You did it. You showed us the way." As they left the UN building that day, stepping out into a world forever changed, Alexander knew that their journey was far from over. There would be more challenges to face, more battles to fight, but for the first time he felt truly hopeful about the future. a future where extraordinary abilities were celebrated, not feared, where diversity was seen as a strength, not a threat. A future that Lily and the other Firefly children had helped to create, one act of compassion and courage at a time. As they drove back to the airport, ready to return to Firefly Academy and the family they had built there, Alexander reflected on the incredible journey that had brought them to this point. From a lonely millionaire to the guardian of extraordinary children, from a world of secrets and fear to one of openness and hope. And at the center of it all was Lily, the scared little girl he had found in the rain, now grown into a beacon of hope for enhanced individuals everywhere. As he watched her chatting excitedly with the others, planning for the future, Alexander felt a sense of peace settle over him. Whatever challenges lay ahead, they would face them together, as a family, as a community, as a united humanity, embracing all its extraordinary potential. The story of Project Firefly had come full circle. What had begun as a secret experiment had blossomed into a movement that was changing the world. And as they flew home, towards a future bright with promise, Alexander knew that the real adventure was just beginning. 10 years had passed since the watershed moment at the United Nations. The world had changed in ways that few could have predicted, adapting to the reality of enhanced individuals living openly among the general population. Firefly Academy had grown from a single secretive campus to a network of schools around the globe, each dedicated to nurturing young, enhanced individuals and helping them integrate into society. Alexander Foster, now in his early 50s, stood at the window of his office at the original Firefly Academy campus, watching students mill about between classes. His hair had begun to gray at the temples, and lines of experience etched his face, but his eyes still held the same determination and compassion that had driven him for the past 2 decades. A knock at the door drew his attention. "Come in," he called, turning to see Lily enter. At 22, she had grown into a beautiful and confident young woman, her extraordinary abilities matched only by her compassion and leadership skills. "Hey, Dad," she said with a warm smile. The word still sent a thrill through Alexander's heart, even years after Lily had first called him that. "Are you ready for the big day?" Alexander nodded, feeling a mix of pride and nostalgia. Today marked the 10th anniversary of the Global Enhanced Rights Act, a piece of legislation that had fundamentally changed the way the world viewed and treated enhanced individuals. And Lily, as one of the most prominent enhanced advocates, was set to give the keynote speech at the celebration in Washington, D.C. "I can't believe it's been 10 years already," Alexander mused, straightening his tie. "Sometimes it feels like just yesterday we were fighting for basic recognition." Lily's expression softened, understanding in her eyes. "We've come so far," she agreed, "but there's still so much work to do." As they made their way to the waiting helicopter, Alexander couldn't help but reflect on the journey that had brought them here. The scared little girl he had found in the rain had grown into a powerful force for change, inspiring both enhanced and non-enhanced individuals alike with her message of unity and understanding. The flight to Washington was filled with last-minute preparations and quiet reflection. Lily reviewed her speech, while Alexander fielded calls from various world leaders and enhanced rights advocates. The cause they had championed had grown far beyond their wildest dreams, becoming a global movement for equality and acceptance. As they approached the Capitol, Lily suddenly grew quiet, her gaze fixed on the horizon. Alexander recognized the look in her eyes. She was using her abilities, sensing something beyond normal perception. "Lily, what is it?" he asked, concern coloring his voice. She turned to him, her eyes glowing faintly. "Change," she said softly. "I can feel it in the air. Something big is coming, Dad. Something that's going to change everything again." Alexander felt a familiar mix of excitement and apprehension. Over the years, he had learned to trust Lily's intuitions. Her abilities had grown and evolved in ways they never could have predicted, allowing her to sense shifts in the very fabric of reality. "Good change or bad?" he asked, though he knew the future was rarely so simple. Lily shook her head, her brow furrowed in concentration. "I'm not sure. It's complex, like ripples in a pond, spreading out in all directions. But I think it's an opportunity, a chance to take another step forward." As the helicopter touched down on the roof of their hotel, Alexander squeezed Lily's hand reassuringly. "Whatever's coming, we'll face it together, just like we always have." Lily smiled, the glow fading from her eyes as she returned his squeeze. "Together," she agreed. The celebration was a whirlwind of activity. Enhanced individuals from around the world had gathered, their extraordinary abilities on display in a breathtaking showcase of human potential. Alexander watched with pride as Lily worked the room, connecting with world leaders and everyday citizens alike with her characteristic warmth and charisma. As the time for Lily's speech approached, Alexander found a quiet moment to slip away to a balcony overlooking the National Mall. The sun was setting, casting a golden glow over the city. He felt, rather than heard, someone join him. "Quite a view, isn't it?" Jonathan's voice came from beside him. Alexander turned to see his father, now in his 70s but still sharp as ever. "It certainly is," he agreed. "Did you ever imagine we'd end up here when you first started Project Firefly?" Jonathan was quiet for a moment, his gaze distant. "No," he admitted finally. "I had hopes, dreams. But this is beyond anything I could have imagined." He turned to Alexander, placing a hand on his shoulder. "And it's all thanks to you and Lily." Alexander shook his head, feeling a familiar warmth in his chest. "Not just us. Everyone who believed in what we were doing, who fought for acceptance and understanding. We all did this together." As they stood there, watching the last rays of sunlight paint the sky in brilliant hues, Alexander felt a sense of anticipation building. Lily's words echoed in his mind. Change was coming. But whatever the future held, he knew they were ready to face it. The sound of applause from inside drew their attention. It was time for Lily's speech. As Alexander made his way back to the main hall, he felt a sense of pride and purpose wash over him. The journey that had begun on that rainy night so many years ago was far from over. In many ways, it was just beginning. And as he took his seat in the front row, watching Lily take the stage with confidence and grace, Alexander knew that whatever challenges lay ahead, they would face them together, as a family, as a community, and as a united humanity embracing all its extraordinary potential. The future was calling, and they were ready to answer. The crowd fell silent as Lily took her place at the podium, her presence commanding attention without a word spoken. Alexander watched with pride as she surveyed the audience, her gaze steady and confident. 10 years ago, Lily began, her voice clear and strong, we stood on the brink of a new era, an era where the extraordinary became ordinary, where the impossible became possible. We faced fear, prejudice, and uncertainty, but we also found hope, acceptance, and a new understanding of what it means to be human. As Lily spoke, weaving a narrative of struggle and triumph, of unity forged in diversity, Alexander felt the energy in the room shift. It wasn't just her words that captivated the audience, but something more, a subtle resonance that seemed to touch each person on a deeper level. Suddenly, Alexander understood. Lily wasn't just speaking, she was using her abilities in a way they had never seen. Before, projecting not just her voice, but her emotions, her memories, her vision for the future. "But our journey is far from over," Lily continued, her eyes beginning to glow with that familiar ethereal light. "As we celebrate how far we've come, we must also look to the challenges that lie ahead. The world is changing faster than ever before, and we, enhanced and non-enhanced alike, must be ready to change with it." As she spoke, the air in the room seemed to shimmer. Alexander gasped as he saw ghostly images begin to form around Lily, visions of the future, he realized, a city powered by the telekinetic abilities of its enhanced citizens, healers using their gifts to cure diseases once thought incurable, enhanced individuals working alongside AIs and advanced robots, pushing the boundaries of what was possible. "The future I see," Lily said, her voice resonating with power, "is one where our gifts are not what define us, but simply a part of who we are. A future where the lines between enhanced and non-enhanced blur, where we recognize the extraordinary potential within every human being." The visions shifted, showing scenes of cooperation and unity. Enhanced individuals working side by side with their non-enhanced counterparts, using their unique abilities to solve global challenges like climate change, poverty, and disease. "But this future is not guaranteed," Lily cautioned. The image is fading. It is a choice we must make every day. A choice to embrace our differences, to support one another, to use our gifts, whether they be enhanced abilities or simply our human capacity for love, creativity and perseverance, for the betterment of all. As Lily's speech drew to a close, Alexander felt a shift in the atmosphere. It was as if everyone in the room, enhanced and non-enhanced alike, had caught a glimpse of the future Lily envisioned and were inspired to make it a reality. The applause that followed was thunderous, a standing ovation. That seemed to shake the very foundations of the building. But even as he clapped, Alexander's mind was racing. Lily's display of power, her ability to project visions to such a large group, it was beyond anything they had seen before. What did it mean for the future? As the celebration continued around them, Alexander made his way to Lily's side. She looked tired, but exhilarated, her eyes still glowing faintly. "That was incredible," he said, pulling her into a hug. "But Lily, what you did, how?" Lily smiled, a mix of excitement and uncertainty in her expression. "I'm not entirely sure," she admitted. "It was like I could feel the potential futures, all the possibilities, and I just knew I had to share them, to show everyone what we could achieve if we worked together." Before Alexander could respond, they were approached by a group of world leaders and enhanced rights advocates, all eager to speak with Lily. As she engaged with them, Alexander felt a tap on his shoulder. He turned to find Diana, her expression serious. "We need to talk," she said quietly. "Something's happening. Something big." Alexander nodded, following her to a quiet corner of the room. "What is it?" Diana took a deep breath. "We've been detecting anomalies, surges of energy unlike anything we've seen before. And they're not just coming from known enhanced individuals. It's like the whole world is waking up." Alexander felt a chill run down his spine, remembering Lily's words from earlier. Change was coming. "What does it mean?" he asked. Diana shook her head. "We're not sure yet, but I think we're on the cusp of another evolutionary leap. And this time, it's not just a select few, it's everyone." As the implications of Diana's words sank in, Alexander's gaze was drawn back to Lily. She was in deep conversation with a group of young, enhanced individuals, her face animated as she shared her vision for the future. In that moment, Alexander understood. The story of Project Firefly, of Lily and the other enhanced children, had never really been about them. It had been about all of humanity, about unlocking the extraordinary potential that lay dormant within every person. And now it seemed that potential was finally awakening. As the celebration continued around him, Alexander felt a sense of anticipation and hope unlike anything he'd experienced before. The world was changing, evolving in ways they were only beginning to understand. And once again, he and Lily found themselves at the heart of it all. But this time, they weren't alone. The movement they had started had grown beyond them, becoming a global force for change and progress. Whatever challenges the future held, they would face them together, not just as a family or a community, but as a united humanity stepping into a new era of possibility. As the night wore on and plans for the future were made, Alexander couldn't help but smile. The journey that had begun on that rainy night so many years ago had led them here, to the threshold of a new dawn. And as he watched Lily, shining like a beacon of hope and possibility, he knew that the real adventure was just beginning. The world was changing, evolving, awakening to its true potential, and they were ready to lead the way into this brave new future, hand in hand, united in their extraordinary diversity.